It is July 5th, 2023. We are in I won't call it the dog days of summer because honestly, though, the days are already getting shorter and we're all recovering from the 4th of July, but we're also recovering from a lack of the knee jerks who have been on hiatus for about a month. But that means it's time for the knee jerks, Detroit Sports Talk of Eno and Big Al. I'm the Big Al of the equation, Al Beaton, longtime Detroit-based podcaster and blogger. Joining me, as always, is the man who knows a lot of things about a lot of things. Greg Eno. Greg, we've had a lot going on in our lives, haven't we?
Yeah, we have, Al, and not all good.
Yeah.
So some of the folks know that I lost my mother on June 6th. So that put us back. There's been vacations in there, and, it's just been kind of a wacky time. So we come at you whenever we can. We're here tonight to help celebrate our 14th, count them, 14th anniversary of doing the Knee Jerks. And then we'll start season 15 in early August. Yes. And there'll be more vacations to fend off at that time frame. Well, I'll be going on vacation, and we'll be bringing in the third jerk, Nick Milanovich, who's with us tonight. Nick,
our super sub,
joined us tonight to help us celebrate 14 years. And Nick, you'll be seeing Nick on occasion when I can't be here, and that next occasion after this will be on August the 16th. But we're all here right now. We're going to be talking to a couple of old friends of the program, Bob Page and Ray Scott. Whenever we do these anniversary shows, Al, we always like to pay homage to people who have helped us stick around for 14 years. And I can't think of two better people to do that with than Bob and Ray. So Bob and Ray used to be a comedy duo, by the way, for the old timers.
Yes.
Bob and Ray.
This is a different Bob and Ray. Going to rages again. Like Bob and Ray, what in the hell?
This is a different Bob and Ray. We always show our age. We're actually, but the cool thing is, Al, we're actually interviewing two people tonight who are older than we are.
Yes,
for a change.
Exactly. And get our references, most part.
Does not often happen.
Exactly.
Bob Page is on the other end of our line right now. We'll be joined by Coach Ray Scott a little bit later on. But Bob is here, and actually, I think he's either in Michigan or about to be in Michigan. Bob, are you in town, so to speak? You are. You're going to Tigers.
Yes, I am. I'm in Detroit, and I'm surprised Nick is still with us after you just called him a jerk. That's a quote from you. You just called Nick a jerk on the show.
I've been called worse, and with a name like Nick, I'll just let your imagination the rest in.
It's funny. Years ago, when I was 100 years ago, I was at Channel 6 in Lansing. When anybody big name, came to town, it was big news. So here came Bill Yeoman, the famous University of Houston football coach. So I walked the Capital City Airport with a camera crew. I'm going to interview Bill Yeoman, right? So I meet him, hail fellow, well met. We get ready to roll. And he looks down at me, he says, "I'm sorry, son. What did you say your name was again? Ron?" I said, no, Bill, it's actually Bob. He said, "Well, I got some advice for you. If Ron is the worst name anybody ever calls you, you're going to have a wonderful life."
Oh, God. Bill Yeoman. Did he pass away? I'm guessing he did. He's probably...
I would guess. And he seemed like an old man to me at the time, for Christ's sake, So they'll be asking that question about me pretty soon, and they're asking that question about Ray Scott right now. Ray's got to be, what's Ray, 98 now, something like that?
No, Ray Scott, author, I didn't, Bob, but for folks who are surprised to hear this, Bob did not know, Al, that Ray authored a book, which of course we'll talk about with Ray when we talk to him. But yeah, Ray wrote a book, and it's doing quite well. And
how long ago did you write this book?
You know what? He started talking about this book, Al, with us 3 or 4 years ago. As long ago
it's a recent thing. That's cool. Yeah, I'm definitely going to get a copy of it and read. I'd like to read that. When I was a kid in Grosse Pointe, growing up in Grosse Pointe, we would get on the bus on Jefferson, and a buddy of mine and I were basketball wackos, and we'd take the bus down to Cobo, where for $1.50 you could get into a Pistons game, and you could move right down into the great seats because there was nobody there, and the ushers didn't bother you in those days. So I saw Ray Scott play a lot, and his nickname, you may know, was Chink.
Right,
because his eyes were a little. I've never heard. That was his nickname. I never heard whether Ray liked it or not. I would assume he didn't. And because his eyes seemed to be a little slanted, looked a little like maybe Asian eyes. I'm telling you, man, in Adam Silver's sanitized PC NBA of today, woke NBA of today, you think that nickname might hold up?
Well, that's another. Well, I think that's why he doesn't like it. He's trying to. I don't think that it was. I don't think it bothered him for the most part, but I think he realizes now.
Well, I'm sure you'll ask him when you have him on. That'll be interesting.
I just don't think he thinks it's a very cool name to have anymore. I don't blame him, frankly. So, but yeah, you're right. Chink was, and you know, I never did see Ray play, but you did, and you know how he was a great rebounder. I mean, a great.
Well, first of all, he was about 6'9" and 240. Yeah. Now, in the NBA today, you got guys who are 7'3" and can jump out of the gym and dribble up the court behind their back if they want to. So it was a different era. But, of course, he did rebound against Bill Russell, against Chamberlain, against some of the great rebounders of all time. Yeah, Ray was a good player. It seems to me he was like 12, 13 point a game kind of guy. Very solid player. Very good player.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to get right into something, Bob, that I wrote about Monday. And I know it's not Red Wings related directly, although it is tangentially. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on the return of Mike Babcock to the NHL. Of course, Mike was fired almost 4 years ago now by the Maple Leafs and had been out of the NHL since then. He coached at Saskatchewan University for about a year. And now he's back with the Columbus Blue Jackets, who took a lot of heat, at least I saw on social media, for even considering hiring him when the rumors were abound that it was going to happen, much less hiring him, and because of his abrasive ways and so forth. Did that surprise? I know you and I were both on the John Tortorella bandwagon when the Red Wings were looking for a coach last year, and of course Torts got hired by the Flyers. But did it surprise you that a team like Columbus, who was the worst team in the league last year, made that move?
No, they needed somebody to kick ass. And when John Tortorella was in Columbus, I used to kid a close friend of mine who was director of broadcasting of an Ohio boy, was director of broadcasting for Columbus for a long time ago, Russ Mollahan. I used to kid him, anytime you want, would you give us John Tortorella, please, and we'll give you Jeff Blashill, and anybody else you want off the Red Wings roster, except Dylan Larkin. I mean, sometimes you need a guy to come in and kiss ass. Mike Babcock has an excellent record, with the exception of his unfortunate time in Toronto at the end. But the thing about Babs is, you can say what you want about him, he's not stupid. He's not stupid. So I would think he would have learned a lesson from all these guys who hated him in Detroit and probably in Toronto too. You might see a little bit different Babs. On the other hand, as they say, a leopard doesn't change his spots. So that's going to be really interesting to see, how they react to him this year. And of course, they're getting our kid back from Grosse Pointe back, Zach Werenski. He missed pretty much all of last year. He did miss all of last year. So he's one of the top defensemen in the National Hockey League, and that in and of itself is going to make Columbus better this year.
That's a good, you make a good point on both sides of the coin. One about the leopard not changing his spots, and also about maybe he Babcock possibly learning a little bit of something from his last experience. Brendan Shanahan, who to me is one of the smartest people in hockey, said shortly after he fired Babs, he said, Mike Babcock's coaching tactics are not acceptable or appropriate. And that to me was that's coming from one of his former players who knows him quite well and who did a lot to bring him over to Toronto, 5 years and $40 million or $50 million or something. It was 8 years and 50. That's what it was. 8 and 50 to bring him to Toronto. And no less than Lou Lamoriello was on board with this and the whole 9 yards. And it just fell apart. And that was, I thought, a kind of a scathing. You don't hear that very often from managers after they fire a coach to say that their coaching tactics weren't appropriate or acceptable. So, I mean, what do you think? I mean, do you think that the Scotty Bowman type coach of yesteryear, who he wasn't a fan of, he wasn't a darling among his players either. Are those kind of coaches, Bob, and even the Torts maybe to a degree, are those guys has their time come and gone? Is there room still in pro sports for guys like that?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. When you look back at Billy Martin and you look back at Mike Keenan and you look back, you remember Les Steckel when he coached the Vikings?
Yeah.
And I know you knew Yeah, off the field, he was a fantastic guy. Rick Forzano was a great guy. But the Lions players hated him because he was a martinet, just like those other guys. So the question you ask is, does that work today? I would suggest to you it doesn't, because the inmates are running the asylum.
Right.
You got guys now making, of course, it's different in hockey where they don't make quite as much money. You look in the NBA, I just saw Van Fleet, signed a free agent contract with Houston. He's making over $40 million this year, guaranteed over the next several years. So you're paying guys 30 and 35 and 40 and $45 million a year. Whom do you think is really running the show? Who do you think is really running the show? So it's just, I don't know. I just think Babs is going to have to, calm down a little bit. And he's a smart guy. I think maybe he'll do that. But again, it's going to be really interesting to see.
Well, obviously the expectations in Columbus are a whole lot different than they were in Toronto, where they still haven't won the Stanley Cup in 56 years. So maybe that'll help a little bit too. Maybe this will fool me. I don't see it being a good match on paper, but maybe it'll fool me, because you never know. But like you said, we'll just have to wait and see. Turning back now to the Red Wings. The Red Wings proper, they just had their draft. We just had a little bit of a free agent flurry, albeit certainly not the big names that we used to have signed around here back in the days of yore. But Stevie is doing Stevie things. He's signing these kind of under the radar guys who aren't, big stars, but, supposedly fit a mode of player that he's looking for. And he's not typical Yzerman, not doling out big long-term, not doling out big money necessarily, just, kind of spreading the wealth and these guys that aren't really going to turn the fan base on. Any thoughts on what's happening with this whole Yzerman thing? We're in year 4 now, really kind of starting year 5.
Well, he's still on his honeymoon. And he is Steve Yzerman. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people, and that would include me, are not really criticizing him much because of what he did in Tampa also as a manager. Everybody says, well, how come he doesn't have a goal scorer? I don't understand some of the decisions he's made. I hated it when he got rid of Bertuzzi instead of re-signing him, I hated it when he got rid of Philip Roenick. Right-hand defensemen, with slap shots over 100 miles an hour are not that easy to find. And once they got rid of Roenick, they said, well, Wings got to get a right-hand shot defenseman, which they did, of course, but you had to go with Seider as a right-hand shot. And they already had one. So in this case, again, these guys know so much more about this than any of us. This is what they do for a living, But, to me, you got a guy who's a consistent 40-goal scorer, which is what the Wings so desperately need, another big scorer. You got a guy, he's a consistent 40-goal-plus scorer, and he's a Detroit kid, and he grew up a Wings wacko, and he'd love to play for Detroit Red Wings. And his team is trying to trade him. How come Alex DeBrincat isn't in a Detroit uniform? I don't understand this, But again, Drapes and Stevie Yzerman know a lot more about this than I do. I just question it, just asking why not, So he's got to get some scoring punch somewhere. And then, they had a kid they thought really might develop into a big goal scorer in Vrana, and he got rid of him for nothing. I know the kid had alcohol or substance abuse problems, but he's just a boy. So what? He's got so much talent. Why would you get rid of him at all, let alone for nothing? Again, Stevie's still on his honeymoon. A bad season this year, honeymoon's over.
But do you think, and this is kind of a hackneyed phrase when you say, does the team have a vision, or does the team have a personality? But what is, I don't want to put you on the spot here, but do you see a plan? We talk about the Yzer plan. That's even kind of a little catchword that you see on Twitter, the Yzer plan. Is there a plan? Is there a vision here? Is it easy to find?
Well, he's made some signings. Well, that's part of the Yzer plan. I like that too. And some of the guys he's signed, they're okay. They're all right, but they haven't been great in a Red Wings uniform. And we're going to know a lot more about this, in another year or less than a year, when we see all these new players he's bringing in, and some of the guys from the last season's team he's letting go. When we see if they produce, when we see how good they are. We see some of the kids that he's drafted over the last 2 or 3 years. when we see if they're ready to play at the NHL level and how good they are. The jury's out, man. I mean, I don't know what else to say. The jury's out, and because it is Stevie Yzerman, you got to cut him some slack. You have to respect him. Say, okay, if that's what you want, then let's do it. Now we see.
We're talking with Bob Page here of the Knee Jerks. I'm Greg Eno, along with Al Beaton and Nick Milanovich. You can check me out on my Substack, gregeno.substack.com. I would appreciate it if you would do that. We are celebrating our 14th anniversary show here on the Knee Jerks, and let's bring Nick Milanovich in. What you got for Bob Page?
Well, let me go to let's talk about a rebuilding team in Detroit, and you're probably saying which one. I'll go with the Pistons on this one, and so the Pistons now just got a new head coach, and so what are your thoughts on Monty Williams now as the coach?
I covered Monty Williams in New York when he played for the Knicks. He wasn't that great a player, not at the NBA level. Is Monty Williams going to suit up for Detroit this year? Is that what he's going to do? Why on earth, in a players' league, not a coaches' league like the NFL, a players' league, would you bring in a guy who just got fired because his teams were underachieving? He had no contractual leverage. Indeed, even said he didn't want to coach again this year. Why would you hire this guy? You can make a case. Why would you hire him to begin with? But you're paying him what? $13 million a year? This is just, it's insanity. So, at this point in time, I think the jury has come back in with a verdict on Tom Gores and the Pistons general manager. It's not working. Gores needs to sell this team to somebody who knows what they do. Now, somebody who knows what to do. Now, the deal is the Pistons, had some really, really bad luck. And that the year that they had the top pick overall in the NBA draft, there just wasn't a franchise player available. There wasn't anybody. There were a bunch of good guys. So they took a good player, and that's all he's ever going to be in the NBA, a good player, very good player. But he's not a great player, and he's not somebody you can build a franchise around. French kid comes out this year. Now there's somebody you can build a franchise around. Pistons had a chance to get him. They didn't have the luck. I mean, the roll of the dice, and it just didn't work out for them. So I don't know what to say. I like the fact that they got Joe Harris, playing with the Nets. Of course, I've seen him any number of times, and we all saw him win a national championship at Virginia. Joe Harris is a good player. He's only signed for the next year, but he can help. If the team improves, which it should a little bit, how good are they still going to be? So I don't see this team doing anything for a long time to come. Of the 4 Detroit pro teams right now, I like the Tigers. The reason is because they got some kids who can play, look like they're going to be really good, and they've had 8 pitchers on the injured list. 8. We saw what Scooble did on Tuesday when he came back. You can say it was only the Oakland A's, I know, but that kid was dealing. He looks just like the Scooble of old, and now we're going to see Erod come back. So they're going to have those two guys. Those are 2 top pitchers. They haven't been pitching. So you got all these pitchers. Manning's healthy again. You got all these pitchers who are coming back. You got all these kids who look like this. Colt Keith is just tearing it up in the minor leagues. I like Kerry Carpenter. I like a bunch of the guys that they have. So I think the Tigers are closest. The Lions, forget about it. As long as the blithering, incompetent Ford family owns the Detroit Lions, they're never going to win anything. It just is what it is.
Okay.
Well,
what about?
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Nick.
No, go ahead, Al.
No, because since we were talking about Tigers, and you brought up some of these guys tearing it up at AAA. Meadows, Colt Keith.
Well, Colt Keith is the big game right now. Again, Meadows is having a real good year, from what I understand as well. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's a future here. I really like Kerry Carpenter. I saw him in spring training this year, and as Ted Williams used to say, he looks hitterish. I don't think he's much of an outfielder from everything I've seen so far, but he can be a DH. I mean, there's just. They got, they have some talent. And I think the Tigers playing in the weak division they do, where the Minnesota Twins, last time I looked a couple of days ago, were leading the AL Central with a 40-42 record. Tigers got a chance to make the playoffs this year. How'd that be?
Yeah. Well, yeah. Are you surprised then they haven't decided to cut bait on some of the guys like Jonathan Scope or Eric Haas? even though Hoskins has been decent the last couple of years power-wise, these guys are not producing right now. They got guys at AAA, as you say, are raking right now, and they are, for all intents and purposes, in a playoff race. When is the time to start bringing these guys up and just seeing what the hell they can do?
Well, I think that's what Tigers management is asking itself right now. Do we want to rush Colt Keith? To me, I don't want them to rush Colt Keith either. I don't want to see Colt Keith in the big leagues in a Detroit uniform until at least this coming weekend.
Yeah.
So you see what I'm saying? What I'm saying? I mean, it's just, they got some kids, and even after ES, Scope just suddenly looks. I always liked him. I always thought he was a good ball player.
Yeah.
He looks washed up. And I don't know what's wrong with Eric, but he's such a good guy, and he's the local kid and everything, and he's valuable because he plays a lot of different positions. You just keep thinking, well, maybe he's going to come out of this slump. But you got ball clubs, and my second favorite team, I guess as you guys know, is the New York Mets, because I've lived in New York as long as I've ever lived in Detroit, believe it or not. And the Mets have a whole bunch of guys who are underachieving. It's like this malaise somehow has infested the entire club as it has the Tigers. We got all these guys, for whatever reason, who are all hitting about 200. I don't know how it all went bad for so many of them at the exact same time. So, I mean, is the Tigers hitting coach to blame? I see in Miguel Cabrera a guy who is beloved by his teammates, one of the greatest hitters who ever lived, who knows an awful lot about this stuff. I've never heard that Miggy is into the three things that pretty much all baseball players are into: fishing, hunting, and golfing. So when he retires after this season, I'm thinking to myself, well, what's Miggy going to do? Yeah, I don't think he's going to be sitting around reading the great literature of all time at his home. Why don't you say, Miggy, why don't you stay with the club? We want you to be our hitting coach. The kids love you. Everybody looks up to you. You know so much about hitting. We'll give you, I don't know, what do you want, $400,000 a year or whatever? I have no idea, to be our hitting coach. You got nothing else to do, man. It'd be fun for you. I'd like to see that, but nobody else has mentioned it. Just something I thought of. I don't know what's wrong. I don't know why they can't get Baez to stop swinging at every low breaking ball 8 to 20 inches outside. Why? Is he stupid? But why aren't the Tigers doing something about this? Surely they must be sitting down in video sessions and saying, look at this, Javi. Why are you swinging at these pitches all the time? There's weird stuff going on, and I'm not being retired. I'm not in the clubhouse asking questions anymore. I don't know. And furthermore, I'm not living in Detroit. I don't really even see the Tigers, that much anymore. So I don't know what to say other than that.
We're talking with Bob Page here on the Knee Jerks. I'm Greg Eno from my Substack, gregeno.substack.com. And please check me out there. Big Al is here, of course. And Nick Milanovich, the third jerk, affectionately known as the third jerk, is here. Let's bring Nick back in. What you have for Bob Page?
Yeah, well, I was just actually thinking about one of Bob's comments about hitting coaches and whether that has any effect on the team hitting. And team's hitting was bad last year, too. They were not hitting above 200 for a long, long time. And their hitting coach was the scapegoat for that.
Yes.
And their
Player Kubal seemed to be the fan base's rallying cry for ages last year. You're right.
Yeah. Well, now they have 3 hitting coaches, right? Essentially, they may have like specialties as far as what they're looking at. Some guys may look at biomechanics. So it doesn't seem to be like a hitting coach issue because they're still not hitting that great overall.
Well, I mean, look, sometimes when you see guys who are hitting 220 and 230 and 210, sometimes they're just not major league hitters. And that's what you're going to get, and it is what it is. But when you see guys like, for instance, Jeff McNeil with the Mets right now, and even Pete Alonso sitting down around 215, you're seeing Lindor having a terrible year. You're hitting when these guys are proven outstanding major league hitters and they're hitting 220, something's wrong, unless they're just totally washed up. So, why they can't get Baez to hit better? He's an established major leaguer, still in his prime. Yeah, I don't know. Again, I'm just not there. But I would think they're going to have to address this and do something unless, as I suggest, the second half of this season after the All-Star break is going to be a lot better for the Tigers.
You raised a good point, though, Bob, a few moments ago about Miggy maybe being hitting coach, which, like you said, I don't think would ever happen either, because as you know, sometimes even the greatest of hitters don't translate to being the greatest of coaches, and I would even flip it
Of
around.
course.
Two of the greatest hitting coaches of all time, of course, were Walt Hriniak and Charlie Lau, and neither of them were anything to write home about as hitters as far as that goes. For whatever reason, they knew how to teach hitting, but they just didn't know how to do it themselves. But back to Miggy, though, I mean, this is interesting because I don't recall the last time the Tigers, especially the Tigers, have had a superstar, surefire Hall of Famer, retire as a Tiger. And the reason I'm bringing this up is I don't know what they're going to do with this guy. Are they going to bring him into the fold? It won't be as a hitting coach, but I mean, do the Tigers... What do they do with him? Is he the kind of guy that just walks away and into the sunset, or will they try to make some space for him?
Case in point, obviously, is Al Kaline, who was a superstar and did retire as a Detroit Tiger. Right. But Al lived here as an American. It was very comfortable for him to live in Detroit. Miggy's English is okay. It's gotten better. It's okay. But he's still, I mean, I don't know how comfortable he is, living in Detroit, especially year round with the weather here and everything like that. Sure. I know I'm sure it must be an amazing place down in Miami, which is in and of itself a foreign Latin nation now. And I know because I live down there in South Florida. But anyway, I mean, Kaline, played a hell of a lot of golf, and he was Al Kaline, of course, they made him a broadcaster. There was a ton of stuff for Al Kaline to do to keep him busy. Miggy, you're not going to put him on the broadcast. I don't think his English is quite good enough to do that. Right. Does he play golf? As I said, I don't even know, did he play his golf? I've never heard that. I don't know what he's going to do in retirement as opposed to Al Kaline. So, I mean, well, who knows? Maybe it'll come up with them. Maybe it won't. I have no idea.
I just, you're right. And Kaline is a good example, but it's the last example. And that was almost 50 years ago when Al retired. So I don't know what the team is going to do with Miggy in terms of keeping him a quote unquote Tiger. I know he'll always be a Tiger in everybody's hearts, but I don't know as from a practical standpoint, if they'll bring him, do they bring him back in Lakeland next year, for example? Will he be working with the kids in Lakeland in uniform? I don't know. I mean, this is
I think that would be, if nothing else, an excellent compromise. Sure, maybe he doesn't want to do the traveling and go through 162 games anymore. So of course, bring him to Lakeland. They've done that with Willie Horton and some other people in the past, so that could work. Yeah, could. Why not?
Yeah.
Isn't that sort of like Alan Trammell's?
Maybe keep him as a consultant too, where you can call Miggy in the middle of the season. He's watching the games on TV and say, "I saw this," or "I didn't see this," or whatever.
Or he could scout players down in Venezuela too, or wherever. I mean,
nobody wants to go to Venezuela. It's not safe. It's just not safe.
And, no, you're right. That's true. Unfortunately, you're right. Nick, what were you going to say? I'm sorry, you said something about Trammell.
Well, I was thinking there was also like Alan Trammell. Hasn't he basically lived in San Diego this whole time, and then and he's like a special assistant.
Exactly.
I mean, I could see that kind of thing.
Sure. And through the magic of, amazing modern communications, he sits in his comfortable den in San Diego and he watches every Tiger game, I'm sure. So, of course, he could help that way, too. Maybe Miggy will do that, too. I don't know. I mean, up until this year, when I refused to be ripped off paying to watch the Detroit Tigers on MLB extra innings any longer, I was sitting at home in South Florida, or New York City, as the case may be, and watching every Tiger game. They didn't ask me if I wanted to critique the team. They didn't pay me anything to do it. But you know what? They're going to pay these guys to sit in their homes and watch the Tigers on TV. That's a pretty good gig. Not a bad gig.
We're talking with Bob Page, and Bob, I know we're supposed to be talking Detroit stuff here, but you mentioned the Mets, and I can't for the life of me. I mean, you see the Mets obviously way more than I do. What has gone on there? I mean, this is a team that's 7 games behind, under 500, 18 games behind the Braves. Clearly not going to make the playoffs, even as a wild card. I mean, Detroit fans follow the team a little bit because, of course, Verlander and Scherzer on it. But what the hell is happening?
That's been part of the problem. Verlander and Scherzer on it. Max has been okay. He's been pretty good at times, actually. But he turns 39 in just another month, I think. And JV, as we know, is already 40. He looks. I mean, I see a lot of Mets games. He looks pretty good. He's not the JV of old, of course. He's not throwing 100 anymore. He looks pretty good. He had some bad luck. He hasn't been as terrible, I don't think, as his record would indicate. But again, with the Mets, you got all these guys who just suddenly aren't hitting any longer. And Buck is just getting raked over the coals, and the new owner, Steve Cohen's getting raked over the coals. This is a ball club that won 101 games last year.
Right.
You know, and so people aren't happy about that. The Yankees have not been doing great either, but they're winning, and they might make the playoffs. They might not. They're in third place in their own division right now, behind Tampa and Baltimore. But I mean, the Yankees at least are pretty respectable, and Aaron Judge has not been playing. The Mets also had an ace closer in Edwin Diaz. And he went down before the start of the season. He's out for the entire year. So that's really great when you start the year and your ace closer's done. He's not going to pitch for you. Yeah. So, I mean, they've had a lot of problems. They've had a lot of problems. But I'll say this. I watched, since I've been back in Detroit a week, I've seen every Tigers game. That's what I do, you know. And so I saw the games in Colorado over the weekend. Now, that's a bad ball club. Detroit's better than Colorado, as we saw. Right. It's a bad ball club. But that stadium out there was still packed. I think one of those games in 50-some thousand seats. I think one of those games was even a complete sellout. So it's interesting how fans, of course, the Mets draw great and the Yankees draw great. I'm not seeing this with the Tigers. I'm seeing, not anywhere near as much interest in the Detroit Tigers as I used to. And I guess I created a stir with some overly sensitive Detroiters on Twitter the other day. That's, by the way, at Bob Page Sports.
You created a stir?
What's that? Yeah. All right.
Which stir are you referring to?
I'm going into Detroit area bars and restaurants with lots of TVs up on the wall during a Tigers game. Game ain't even on, and it's not even on. And I'll say to a bartender, for instance, let me ask you a question: has anybody asked that you put the Tigers game on? No, nobody. So I think that Detroit is overrated as a sports town. We always thought what a great sports town. I don't think it is anymore. And you can say, well, that's because the 4 professional sports teams have all been so awful. Maybe, but other markets seem to support, their team. I mean, I can't imagine Toronto Maple Leafs, for instance, despite all the frustration. I can't imagine their fans deserting them. But it kind of seems like that's what's happened in Detroit, with the Tigers. And the Pistons are just almost passé. You see these Pistons games and just hardly anybody down there in that beautiful arena they built.
I would feel a lot worse about this situation if the Tigers were drawing well. My feeling is power to the people, man. They're boycotting this team essentially. The Tigers have not been good in about 8 years, and they're not only have they not been good, they've been boring. They're unexciting. They're uninspiring.
I don't agree with that. I just don't agree with that. I'm sorry. You got in his prime Miguel Cabrera. It's never boring. Because this guy, who knows what this guy is going to do when he gets up to the plate? And they had, I don't know how many years ago. Maybe it was
plays half the games. Number one.
Yeah. So it was. I will never forget this. When either Al Avila got a bug up his rear end to do this on his own, which I don't believe, or was told to do this by Chris Ilitch. This is a ball club. This is a few games out of a playoff spot. It was like bang, 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 bang. Every day they got rid of another big star on this team. How many years ago was that? That's been 5 years now or something like that. So this was a good club, and it was an entertaining club. You got Justin Verlander, for goodness sake, and so many other players on that team. I see JD Martinez as the designated hitter for the All-Star game for the National League. They just got rid of him. There's so many guys you just got rid of, and I never understood that. And I think it pissed some people off. And maybe that's.
Well, you think you're answering your own question about why the fans aren't showing up. I mean, why? Yeah. I guess I'd flip it around and say, why would you show up? What about this team makes you compelled to plunk down $40 or whatever it is for? I don't even know how much it is for a ticket anymore. Drive down to the ballpark, pay whatever you have to pay to park, walk to the ballpark, sit there for 2.5 hours, and watch them get 5 hits and 2 runs off of a guy who comes into the game with a 7.11 ERA. What about that is compelling?
Yeah, I know. The only thing I can say is that, sometimes over this past number of years you're talking about, I'll just go to a Tigers game by myself when I'm in Detroit. I drive downtown. If you park far enough away from the ballpark, which isn't too far, park right on the street. It doesn't cost you a dime. And you can walk up to the stadium. You could buy a decent seat from a scalper outside for no more than $15 or $20. So I'm not even sure that's an excuse anymore. But, but really essentially what you're saying is true. I mean, people want to see their team win. And I think the mark of a great sports town is that they're loyal to their teams through and through. And Detroit fans have not been loyal. They've not been loyal. Do I blame them? Again, to get at what you're saying, not really. I mean, it's no fun.
But your comments, Bob, are dripping with irony, because the one fan base that is loyal is the one.
Here it comes.
Yep.
The team that you can't fathom them being loyal to, which is the Lions.
Go figure. Go figure.
So either you want loyalty or you don't. I mean, which is it? Do you want loyalty or don't you want loyalty?
Yeah, I'm sitting in Grosse Pointe with a buddy of mine at a bar the other night. A couple other guys sitting down right to us. One's this black guy, about my age, I would say. He was no spring chicken, gray hair, the whole thing like that. This guy is sitting at the bar with a Detroit Lions cap and a Detroit Lions jersey on. Mm-hmm. I almost wanted to say, you're way old enough to know better. What's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? But I mean, you talk to young people these days, from teenagers into maybe their early 40s. They have no clue about the sordid history of the Ford ownership of the Detroit Lions. They have no clue, and they don't want to know. They've never even heard the name Russ Thomas. They have no idea how this team's been run into the ground and what's been going on. And now, of course, we have the utterly brilliant veteran football mind, Sheila Hamp, as the top owner of the Detroit Lions. She's the one making the decisions. That must make Lions fans feel real good too. So it's just, look, I quit I quit following them a long time ago. I watched the annual Thanksgiving Day game because it's usually good for a lot of laughs, how they're going to choke and give it away this time. Other than that, I have no interest in the Detroit Lions, and I never will.
We're wrapping things up with Bob Page here on the Knee Jerks. This is our 14th anniversary show. We're happy that you're with us. And let's squeeze in one more from Al Beaton. What you got for Bob?
Well, this is more, I think, for the three of you, actually, because I know all three of you are heavy Twitter users. Obviously,
just don't call me a jerk. Just don't call me a jerk. Calling
How about a ceremonial jerk at this point? But obviously, Elon Musk seems to be determined to spiral Twitter into the ground. And you guys have been on Twitter for a long time. I bailed on it quite a while ago. Are you guys making any kind of plans? Or are any of you guys poking around to see what other options there could be? Because I would have a feeling in a year, especially with the rate limiting that's going on and this $8 blue check bullshit, that Twitter is not going to be anything close to what we know it now. And where are we going to go? Where are you going to go to talk sports?
If you want me to go first, I will if you want. I've only been on Twitter for 3 years. I never, ever, ever wanted to join Twitter. I thought it was merely the province of dumb jocks and dumb rappers. No way was I going on Twitter. But when we started our late, much lamented podcast, both Eli and Drew Lane came to me and said, we really need you to be on Twitter to help publicize the show. So I sighed and said, okay, fine. So I went on Twitter, and I found out that I really, really liked it. I enjoyed talking with everybody, and people, generally speaking, are so nice to me on Twitter. God, they remember me from my career all these years, going back almost 50 years now. So I enjoy it. Now I've reconnected with a lot of people I used to know, and I've met new people like Nick, for instance, and it's just, it's kind of cool. Somebody told me if they had Twitter when I was in the prime of my career, I would have had 250,000 followers. I guess like some guys do.
Yeah.
I'll never even get close to that. I understand that now what you can do is you can somehow link Twitter up with the other similar social media platform, which has helped me with this. It's Instagram. You can hook it up with Instagram, so your tweets can be seen on both sites. I've been meaning to look into this, for some time, but sir, no excuses, sir. I just haven't. So that's how I feel about it. I still enjoy it. But of course, everybody's concerned about the future of Twitter. Yes.
Yeah, Nick, you're out in Seattle. What would you do? Would you go to Blue Sky? Would you go to Mastodon? I mean, there's all these different options out there. It seems like everybody's there's Post. People are bailing. I'm not sure what's going to happen, because I don't think all of a sudden people realize just how vital Twitter has become.
Well, I've thought about this a little bit. What would I do? I haven't looked into any of the other social media platforms. The only other one I'm on is LinkedIn, and then one specific for scientists, which I hardly use. And I don't know. I think if Twitter just kind of goes like belly up, the biggest thing I'd be bummed about is keeping in touch with the guys that talk about Detroit sports. I think that's been fun. Before that, I didn't like have anything in particular I wanted to talk about or had a group of people that I'd converse with before, about maybe a little over a year ago when we started. All the Detroit folks and expats have been hanging out together and venting their frustrations with Detroit sports. And as far as like Elon Musk and what he's doing, like I refuse to be triggered by every stupid little thing he does. I mean, he farts a little wrong and then everybody goes crazy. And like, I don't care. And I kind of know what he's doing. He's one of this, West Coast tech type things where they're always playing around with something. And that's what he's doing with Twitter. This tweet limited thing that he had this weekend was supposed to be a temporary thing. He laid off a bunch of people and they're scrambling to figuring out how to keep Twitter going at all. And he's also tried to see if he can make money on it. Once they charge me for Twitter, then I'm gone.
Yeah.
I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
I'll figure out something else. But, otherwise I'm just rolling with some of the ups and downs. It's not like something that's making me money, so I don't really care that much. Yeah. In a sense, it's not a source of revenue.
Yeah.
So
I am interested in this blue sky thing though. I confess I don't know much about it, but I'm like Nick though. And Bob, I have a lot of fun just not being political and just being sports minded and having fun that way. And some of these things that Musk is doing don't really affect me. I know it sounds terribly selfish, but they really don't affect me per se. I think he's annoying. He can be, he's such a rich bored kid. He's a rich bored kid is what he is. And he's got a toy to play with. And that's what he's doing.
I mean, this is, come on now. This guy may be extremely eccentric to say the least. It was Time Magazine's Man of the Year. Was that last year or 2 years ago? He's a brilliant guy. He's no kid. People say that he drastically, unnecessarily overpaid to buy Twitter. Seemed like that, but boy, they got a lot of ads on Twitter now that I never used to see. So they're selling advertising. I'm sure, he'll do something with this and make something out of this. I don't know what's going to happen. And the other things that Al was just mentioning, blue sky and something else, I've never even heard of it till this moment. Yeah. So they got a long way to go before they really cut into the Twitter audience.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think it'll ever go away per se, but he's certainly hurt the brand. Hurt the brand, I think. Now, whether he's hurt it irrevocably, how do you pronounce that?
Irrevocably.
I don't know.
Irrevocably.
Something like that.
Something that. Yeah.
That's why Bob made the big money back in the day.
That's right.
Yeah, right.
Hey, Bob is 72 or 71 and can still say those words. He can still pronounce those words. So that's kudos to him. Yeah. Okay, Robert. Well, thanks for. Go ahead. You got one more thing you wanted to drop on us?
No, I'm just going to say about Twitter. I still think it's fun, and and of course it's easy for me to say because I'm retired. I mean, my schedule is my own. I have just tons of time on my hands to do pretty much within the legal limits of the law anything I'd like to do. So I enjoy that. But so that's where we stand with that right now, at least. But it is a changing world, boys. We all know.
Tell us real quick what are some of your plans when you're going to be in town? I know you're going to go to the ball game tonight as we record.
I'm going to force you to finally take me to one of those. I'm going to force you to finally take me to one of those other pizza places besides Buddy. What is it, Clover Lee or something like that?
You wanted to go to Louis, didn't you? Or what's
there's one in I think so. There's one in Madison Heights or something like that. I've never been to those places before. So other than that, I just, my daughter's about my best friend in life, and I get along great with her husband, and a lot of friends here, and stuff to do, and places to go, and things to see. I just, despite some idiots on Twitter again who think that I hate Detroit somehow, I love Detroit. I love my hometown. I love to come back to Detroit. So there's always something for me to do here. Always something for me to do.
Well, we'll look forward to me, you, and Nick getting together, Bob. We'll set that up. Nick's going to be in Michigan next week. We'll set that up, and we'll look forward to that. And Al says he wants a report on that.
Yes, because I'll be in Florida for two. I'm going to Florida on Saturday, so yeah, I'll be.
Where are you going?
My father lives in Central Florida, a place called Barefoot Bay, just outside of Sebastian. So I'm going down there to visit him for 2 weeks.
Well, I'll tell you what, man. It's that you ain't gonna have no fun playing golf down in Sebastian, Florida this time of year. I promise you that much. And it's going to be tough. But I always tell people always ask me what Florida's like in the summertime. I'm not there that much, but I have been there a lot. And I always say this: that if you're overweight, if you're out of shape, if you're a cigarette smoker, or if you're elderly, you're going to have a lot of problems in Florida in the summertime. But if you're not, it's okay. And nights usually are beautiful. So I'm sure you'll have fun, Al. Have a good time.
Thank you.
Well, thanks again, Bob, for doing this. Thanks for helping us celebrate 14 years, and I look forward to seeing you next week in person.
Yeah, okay. And once more, Greg, my condolences on losing your mother. It's just
thank you.
a very difficult thing, no matter what age we are, what age our parents are. We all become orphans eventually. It's just very sad that happens. So.
Yeah, no, thanks, Bob.
All right, Nick, nice to talk to you. Thanks for having me, boys, and I'll talk to you soon.
All right, great chatting, Bob.
Take care.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye. All right. What can I say about Ray Scott? A good friend of the Knee Jerks, good personal friend of ours, always supportive of us, the show, just a fantastic human being, one of my favorites. And it's always so nice, Al, when we have these anniversary shows, which seems, by the way, they seem to come so fast. I can't believe it's another year has gone by already. But whenever we do these, we like to bring back the folks that kind of, helped us establish this program. And Ray is one of those. He was on board with us. And I know I say this every year, but it bears repeating. He was with us from the beginning, practically, when we started this podcast in 2009. Ray and I had met each other before that, of course. We had known each other a few years prior to that. But as far as the podcast goes, he's been with us from the get-go. And it just doesn't seem right to celebrate any anniversary that we have.
Yeah. I was going to say, Coach has been around so long, the mid-range game still existed in the NBA.
My goodness.
And we still have not celebrated the Pistons winning a playoff series in the 14 years we've interviewed this man. But I know. Coach Ray Scott's with us on the other end of our line. And Coach, how you doing tonight?
Well, we're doing well, thank you, and we're happy to be with you. And we hope that you, as well as our country, celebrated a very happy 4th of July. Independence Day is a very important holiday in our lexicon, along with Juneteenth. So this is a great time.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned Juneteenth, by the way. I'm very proud to say that our company, the company that I work for, my day job, officially, recognizes that as a corporate holiday. And it's a day of reflection. We always have Juneteenth related things going on at work in terms of from a cultural standpoint. We think it's very important that our employees understand the significance of it. And so it's definitely something that, right in the middle of Pride Month, which is another month that we celebrate at work. Wow. So it's good to have all those kind of things, like you said, kind of come together. We are joined by Ray Scott, and we're going to talk a little bit about the as we always do, the new and the old. But among the new is something that Al and I are kind of proud of Coach to talk about, because this is something that Coach kind of, we feel like we're one of the first ones that knew about this project when he first was talking about launching it, which is his book, The NBA in Black and White, the memoir of a trailblazing NBA player and coach, which Al, I'm sure, will drop a link to in the show notes, where you can pick it up. But we've been kind of privy to this project even before pen hit paper, and now it's out. It's been out, of course, for a little while, but we really haven't, Coach, really talked to you too much about the book in the sense of like the kind of feedback you've gotten, how it's been received, any personal feedback you've gotten from your inner circle or even outside your inner circle. So why don't you just kind of take us through that, you've taken us through the journey of writing the book and that the project, but now kind of take us through the journey of the post writing of it and your reception.
Yes, thank you. Yes, the reception has really been good, guys. I'm actually tickled to death because Jennifer and we do track the book and what sales we can track. We've gotten exceptional, in my opinion, accolades, and the accolades are there and are thrilling for me because the book was written as a parallel existence in the United States and the universe that we all exist in. And I was trying to see it from two sides. And so I wrote the book with the idea in mind that I would look at the world as seen from a perch in the NBA for an African-American kid that was coming into the NBA at 22, coming through segregation, coming through the 60s, which was such a volatile period, but a pleasing period because that was the era of civil rights, and it was the era of Dr. King and Medgar Evers and Rosa Parks. So it was more than a conventional decade. I was growing up in that period in the most unconventional decade. And it just really said to me, I want to share my view from an African-American kid coming in with John Fitzgerald Kennedy in 1960 and looking at the world through that lens. And the book was written from that perspective. And so, of course, there's a lot of names because there were so many people during the course of the 60s that grew up and helped make professional basketball. And four of those people were Wilt Chamberlain, Oscar Robertson, Elgin Baylor, and I always forget the fourth guy, Bill Russell. But those four guys, pinnacle, believe it or not, for the NBA, because the NBA grew into this conglomerate that we have now, which is technology and TV and games everywhere, we were a spectator sport. So it was up to the guy that went to work every day and said, I think I want to go down and see the Pistons tonight against the Lakers or the Celtics or one of the 9 teams in the league. And so it was, from that perspective, it was really interesting. But then looking at the league that was built with respect to all Americans and all conference players. And so the interest had to be pretty much marginalized because you got a little bit of radio, maybe a lot of newspaper, and the people in the stands. And so that was my beginning in professional basketball. But the talent itself was exquisite, and I wanted to write about how exquisite a Wilt Chamberlain, a Bill Russell, and Al were, and talk about them, and then explain to the people that while this was going on, we were also, instead of being marginalized African American or Negro players, we were coming into our perspective of civil rights. So civil wrongs were now becoming civil rights. And as a result of that, and I hate to say it, but there were assassinations and things that occurred. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't in the sanctity of the locker room and not seeing, hearing, or talking about that. So I wanted to share that kind of with the readers and how we grew as a league in the 60s, not only as a country, but the kids that were sitting in the locker room as people.
You know, and that's what makes this, to me, this book so fascinating is that it's not really just a book about the NBA, because it happened. You mentioned it at the top of the discussion. This was an extraordinary decade to live in, frankly. I mean, I was born in '63, so I didn't get a flavor of it. I guess I was more of a child of the '70s, but I mean, yeah. The decade that you are writing about, it's almost like the NBA is almost like like the backdrop, if you will, to everything that's going on in that decade. You mentioned assassinations, lots of violence, political upheaval, the civil rights movement, and so forth. So is it fair to say, and because I don't want to put words in your mouth, but is it fair to say that this is really not just a book about the NBA?
Oh, yes, you are putting words in my mouth, and that's good. That it is not a book about the NBA. It is actually a book about living in the parallel universe that we live in. We all live in it. We all, from the sanctity of our homes or our businesses, we all, there is always the world outside. But the view for the NBA was not only to see it, but to be part of it. That in my opinion, is important, that we understand how we not how we grow, but how we grow up. And when you were speaking, Greg, I was thinking about an important piece to that is not only was the 60s an important decade, but the 60s as a decade ran into, and you know this well, ran into the 70s. So although we say the 60s, it was really a 20-year period.
Yeah, that's true.
And things really did not turn around in America until 1980.
Yeah.
Until a completely new administration took over and looked at the world from a different perspective. So then, that would call for another book.
Well, this is something that here's something that I'm lifting right off the Amazon link here, because I think this quote right here that I'm going to read, it just exemplifies what I'm talking about. This quote that I'm about to read has nothing to do with the NBA as far as I'm concerned. Here, this is Ray quote: "There's a basic insecurity with black guys my size. We can't hide, and everybody turns to stare when we walk down the street. Whites believe that their culture is superior to African American culture. We don't accept many of their answers, but we have to live with them." Talk about that, if you would.
Well, you see, because so much of the documentation up until that time was written with kind of a segregational basis, and as I say in the book, in 1950, I went to Washington, D.C. In 1950, I was 12 years old. I didn't know anything about segregation. That's where I learned it. That's where I learned about the Green Book, how we travel, how blacks travel in the South. And so we had to look at and obey the customs of those times in order to survive. And so people were telling us how we should live, how we should integrate, how we should how we should be educated. And so with all of those things kind of coming at you in a very quiet but a beneath the radar way, heck, we just, we're trying to get along, trying to survive. And so here we are. That was when I was, 14, 15. Today I'm going to be 85 next week.
Right.
I mean, I've had very, very key observations, not only of our system, but of the NBA. When guys look at me and they laugh, Wilt Chamberlain, he was a stiff. He played against all plumbers. And you're telling me that you know nothing about the NBA,
right?
Just as you knew nothing about integration.
Right. That's a good point.
Because we didn't understand that as a people, as African American or Negroid people, we came from a continent. We didn't come from a country. Nobody stopped to think and talk with us about what tribe did you come from, or were you from Northern Africa or Southern Africa or Eastern Africa or Western? No, it's never been thought. There's never been palaver about that. And I think those are discussions that we should be having with respect to our educational system.
We're talking with Coach Ray Scott here on the Knee Jerks. I'm Greg Eno from my Substack, gregeno.substack.com. And Big Al, of course, is here. But let's bring in Nick Milanovich, our lovingly known as the third jerk. Nick, what you got for Coach Scott?
Well, what it made me think as you're describing this book, I'm really interested in reading this. And because I just recently read another book about Detroit called Once a Great City. And it was about Detroit in the early 60s, which I think was about the time you joined the Pistons, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
And it was this kind of mix of the history, the civil rights. They talked about Motown and like a big, just sort of kind of collection of, characteristically Detroit things, and how the history was evolving, how Detroit was, I think they were saying in this case, on the decline because of a lot of unrest at that time. Me being born in the 70s, this is all historical to me, so I'm having to learn it, not by having lived it. So it'd be really interesting to read your book, and I will, to like, what do you call it? To get some additional feel for what Detroit was like at that time.
Mm-hmm. So, Nikki, I came here in 61, brother. And when I came in 1961, this was the great change in Detroit. And the great change in Detroit and the creation of the middle class came about because of the creation of credit unions. Chrysler, General Motors, I think American Motors was there. It was at that time, but it was still a big three. But and Ford. But when they created the credit unions, that's how the system was run from that period that created the middle class, where people got cabins up north, they got recreational vehicles, they got motorcycles, they got boats, because they were able to purchase them through the credit unions, where as African Americans, that was not going to happen through the banks. So when I came here and I saw the homes in Northwest Detroit, and they had lawns, they had to mow their lawns. I'm from Philadelphia. Everything was asphalt and connected homes. I came to Detroit. Well, you guys got it going on. And the piece to it was the unions. I learned a lot from the union behavior in Detroit. So I said, my goodness, I want to be a part of something as dynamic as what they have going on here. And I played in the first game ever played at an arena that was built for basketball in Detroit, which was Cobo Arena. Other than the field houses on the campuses, that was it. So Cobo Hall became just a real paragon of sports and union meetings and so forth, and the Michigan Sports Hall of Fame. So I see all of this now, and I said to myself, Self, you want to stay here. There's something going on in this city. And there truly was. And yes, because of the movement and people, Dr. King inspiring us to demonstrate for civil rights. But we also had Wilt Chamberlain averaging 50 points a game. We also had the Detroit Lions coming off of their championship years, but getting Super Bowl years in football and baseball and the 68 Tigers. So there was, I think, in my opinion, Michigan was one of the most happening places on the planet. And to be a part of that and have enough money in your pocket to go out to dinner and go down to Grand Circus Park and have dinner with your family and walk around downtown and shop at these grand stores and have Hudson's. And I wanted people to know that, yes, we headed for troubled areas, but part of that was the plan for the city, which was to move the city out to Farmington Hills and up 75. That was part of the plan, and it happened. And they were, to create a new dynamic was what they wanted to do, and with the city planning, and it happened. So yes, that leaves you bereft of tax dollars, and your tax base decreases, and your security with your police decreases, and your security with your firemen decreases. So all of it, yes, this happened, Nikki. That was a big deal in the 60s. But what I'm saying is I was present and I wanted to be accounted for.
I've never asked you this question, Coach, because I know that for those who don't know, Coach was born in Philadelphia, as was, of course, the aforementioned Will Chamberlain, and was part of that great, that city just produced so many great basketball players, especially in that time frame. How would you compare Philadelphia to Detroit? I mean, what comes? I've never really asked you that. What's the comparison between the two cities?
It's a great question, because Philadelphia was a big cosmopolitan city made up of Quakers. Main line was what we call the old money. That's Villanova and St. Joe's and LaSalle. And then the city school, which was Temple, and the Ivy League school, which was University of Pennsylvania. So that was Philadelphia. Detroit, in my opinion, was a union town. We were union tough. UAW, AFL-CIO,
right?
SEIU. That was the big thing here, not the university, but the union, and that was the working man. And so I always felt, although it's a small town, 40 square miles, I always felt it was a working man's town. This was the working man's dream town, and they came up out of Kentucky and Tennessee and the southern states to work here and have that here. So that was the variation to me.
Yeah, that's you're right, because my wife's parents moved to Michigan to the Detroit area from New Jersey. Why? Because that's where the work was at the time. And they moved here in the 40s, shortly after they got married. And they moved here because he was, a blue collar guy, and there were the jobs here right after World War II were abundant, and they came from New Jersey. So exactly. Let's bring Big Al in. What you got for Coach Scott?
Yeah, just to go back to the book for a little bit, I see you got an NBA Hall of Fame legend, one of the best known players of your era, to write the introduction, to write the foreword for your book, and Earl Monroe. How did you get Earl the Pearl to write the foreword?
Well, that hurts me, Big Al. That means you don't know my history. I played with Earl as the Baltimore Bullets. I was there when he was drafted, and I had one of the best years of my career playing alongside Earl. I was I think I did 16 games, and I was 6th in the NBA in rebounding. With Earl, there were a lot of rebounds. So he was a very proficient NBA player. That's an inside joke we had.
I was going to say, that means he had a lot of missed shots, right?
Sorry, it was very quiet. But Earl was my friend, and we grew up in Philadelphia. But he was a few years behind me. I went to West Philadelphia High School. He went to Boston. We were both all city, and so we were friends. We grew up as friends, and he covers that in his well written forward and well documented forward. I'm sure many people have gotten the book because they saw that Earl had his fingerprints on the book, and he's very eloquent, and he too was observant. And we talked about the times that we were growing up in, but Earl would be more aligned with you guys. He's a 70s guy. I thought helped transform the Bullets along with Wesley Unseld, so that we too were talked about around the kitchen table of basketball. And so I asked him if he would do the forward for my book. I had he and Hubie Brown lined up because I knew both of them. Hubie did the cover for me, but Earl did the forward, and he agreed to do so. And I think it's helped with the sales of the book. It's actually been out just a little bit over a year. Or it was June 14th that we released the book, and I had a book signing at Little Caesars Arena with the Detroit Pistons. They had me do a book signing, and I was honored to do that. And I got to meet the Miami Heat team before they were really the Miami Heat team. They weren't even in the conversation to get in the playoffs. And here I'm talking to Eric Spoelstra and Kevin Love, and a couple of months later, these guys are in the playoffs, going all the way to the finals. So I was very fortunate to be a part of that. But Detroit's my home. I've been here 60 plus years, and I have not regretted a moment.
Now,
My daughters were born here, and
Yep.
my wife is from Michigan.
Yep, and you met your bride at Eastern Michigan, right? Is that?
That's correct.
Yeah,
That's
right.
correct.
My alma mater. Yeah. Okay.
That's correct. Yeah.
Now back to Eric Spoelstra. Some folks, again, I'm showing my age, and that's okay. Eric Spoelstra, was it his uncle or his grandfather that was the great Watson Spoelstra, who was the
Watson Spoelstra was his grandfather.
Grandfather. Okay. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
I grew up reading Watson Spoelstra.
Yeah.
You might know. I never told you this, but a couple doors down from me, when I grew up in Livonia. In fact, my mom's house is still there. A couple doors down from us lived a gentleman named Herb Bolt, and Herb used to be the sports editor of the Detroit News.
Yes.
And yeah,
I wrote a column for a year for the Detroit News, front page sports, and Herb Bolt was the guy that put me there, and I was just, oh man, that was a great year. But what I found out in writing that column every Sunday, it's how hard you guys work. You guys that do the printing, and I know, Greg, you've done a lot of print work, and man, that's hard work. That is hard work.
Yeah, sometimes when that blank screen stares you in the face mockingly,
yeah,
and that cursor's blinking, it's like, okay, what the hell am I going to do today? Let's bring Big Al. Just did Big Al. Let's bring Nick back in. What you got for Coach Scott, Nick Milanovich?
Oh, my mind's on the Pistons and trying to get your take on the Pistons now. I think out of the 4 Detroit sports, I like watching basketball the most for some reason. And
oh my.
No matter, I'll watch the other ones too. Well, the Lions I won't, but the others I will. And and it's killing me that they're having such rough seasons the last few years. And what's your take on kind of the direction that the Pistons are going now?
Nicky, I'm in a wait and see. I'm in a wait and see because I was hurt last year when they did not make the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
I thought Coach had the kids that he could develop, but then injuries set in, and then you make a couple of trades, and you change your dynamic. So I'm kind of where I was specific last year in saying I thought they would make the playoffs. This year I'm kind of wait and see. I want to see training camp. I want to get a look at exhibition games. And then because they have the makings. I will say that they have the makings. And I think they've drafted well. I do think they've drafted well.
Let me ask you this: as a former coach, when you look at Monty Williams and the money that the Pistons threw at him, Tom Gores threw at him to get him to come to Detroit. I know there's a brotherhood. There's a brotherhood among players for sure, but there's also a brotherhood among coaches. Does the coach part of you say, right on, it's good to see a guy like that make a lot of dough like that, or are you like, damn, why couldn't I have been bored 30 years later?
Well, you're never gonna, you're born where you're born, and that's your time. That's right. It's your era. You know what I mean?
Right.
We can't help that. Shaq is born when he's born, and never the twain shall meet.
Right.
So my feeling is, I think the Lord hands us what he hands us, and you make the most of that. And I think back to the guys, if I would be totally unfair to guys that played before me, like Al Attles and Earl Lloyd and Maurice Stokes and, guys that played for thousands of dollars, but it was so much more than the money that the people were making that were going out the door every day to go to work. So I feel that I was blessed. When I look at the numbers, I mean, $13.9 million to coach for one season. That's I can't even.
Right.
I can't even fathom that.
Right.
You know, but when I look at the job that he's done as a coach, he certainly is worthy in that he has performed. He's done a great job. He built a super team, and he built a good team with the Pelicans in New Orleans. But he built a team and should have. But I think they got ahead of themselves and traded his away from him. And I think that's, that the handwriting's on the wall. But I think he's an excellent coach. Money notwithstanding. And I know as a taught now to focus on money, but I try to stay within the parameters of the game, look at the players. It's like I hear people complain about LeBron, and I go, no, I'm not. In my book, I dedicate it to him because he looks at what he does as the opportunity to help his community. And I just admire a guy for that. Mm-hmm. And you'll also see my piece that I quote Bill Russell on in the book. And, these are superb, good people. So I don't want to base my evaluation on them in a dollar away. I think because we lose track of who that person really is.
Clearly, well, okay, let me rephrase this because I don't want to poison the well by asking it the way I was going to. Let me ask it this way. There are some folks who think that, a lot of folks who think that the NBA is a players' league. Okay. But now, if you agree with that notion, can you tell me when you think that turned? In other words, when you coached in the 70s, would you have considered it, Ray, at that time, a players' league? And if not, when did we make the transition, even if it was gradual, to it being a players' league?
Oh, I think the NBA has always been a players' league from the time of George Mikan.
Okay.
Yes, because of the command of its stars. Mm-hmm. From Mikan to
makes sense. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
To Russell to Chamberlain to Oscar to West to Baylor.
Okay.
When I grew up, to Bob Pettit in St. Louis, it's the players' league. That's the command.
Okay.
The guy that paid the price for that, in my opinion, was Oscar Robertson. Because Oscar was the guy that started the Players Association.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And I was on his board with him. I served under him on the board in 1966 when he met with the owners to look for certification for the Players Union. Now you say, well, what does that have to do with Oscar? Well, Oscar was the guy that made the appeal. He made the presentation in 1966. In 1970, we were certified as a union because of the work done by Oscar and Larry Fleischer, our attorney. However, if you stop right there and you'll say, whatever became of Oscar Robertson? He never became, with all of the great work that he did and with the enrichment of the players today, Oscar Robertson has never served in the NBA as an owner, as a president, as a vice president, or as a general manager or as a coach. How could that be?
That's true. You're absolutely correct. He did some broadcasting work, but you're right. He's almost like the Hank Aaron of basketball when you think about it.
Yes.
Because
Hank Aaron served in a much more pristine league.
Yeah.
In my opinion, baseball was much more. I'm from Philadelphia. I rooted for two teams in 1950, and none of them had a black player.
Right.
The Philadelphia Athletics and the Philadelphia Phillies.
Right. Yeah. And then look what Philadelphia. This is kind of going off on a tangent, but look what Philadelphia did to Dick Allen. Dick had that famous quote: "I'll play right field, I'll play third base, I'll play first base. I just won't play in Philadelphia." Because those writers back then that would insist on calling him Richie, even though he didn't want to be called Richie. I mean, it was almost childish the way that some of these reporters, media, treated guys like that. But I didn't really think about that with Oscar until you mentioned it. You're right. He didn't.
Yeah.
He did not. You're absolutely correct. He never was. That's true. That's true. It's sad, but
and
true.
I think he committed the cardinal sin. The cardinal sin, in my opinion, was taking the NBA to court. And the two superstars that did that never served. Will Chamberlain and Oscar Robertson.
Do you think he was blackballed?
Oh, I don't think it's. See, blackball suggests that you have to have a conspiracy of thought. The way the world is that we come from, he was just never even given a thought. I don't think they sat down ever at a table and said, we'll never have Oscar Robertson serve in this capacity. We'll never have. I don't think it's even a thought with what we've come through. But I'm going back to the time that the question fits.
Interesting. Before we let Coach go, Big Al, you got one more for Coach Scott?
I know you've alluded to it in the past when we talked to you, but I'm sure there's plenty of stories and of your life history that you didn't put in the book. Do you think you have another book in you?
Yes, I've written another one, but I wrote it on boxing, and it's in the publisher's hands.
That's right.
Okay, great.
He did mention that.
Yes. What will happen with the boxing book? But my wife wants us to jointly write a book called The Scots in Black and White, because we're an interracial couple.
Yeah, you are. That's right.
Yeah.
And we have children, and we'd like to talk about how we raised our children, how, we got housing in Michigan. We want to talk about the reception in Michigan, the reception at Eastern Michigan. My wife worked at the University of Michigan. So Michigan, again, pathologically, it flows throughout my veins. But we would like to speak to that, about taking up that project in September.
Well, I tell you what, if anybody wants to look at a good-looking family, Ray Scott's family, his girls are gorgeous. I mean, they're just beautiful, and I know that they're probably just as gorgeous inside as they are out. Same with lovely bride Jennifer, the same thing.
Yeah.
And you're very blessed, my friend, and we are blessed to spend so much time with you this evening and to help us celebrate 14 years. And all I can say is God bless you. Have a great, happy 85th next week, and thanks for doing this.
Thank you, my friends, and thank you for having me for this anniversary date. You'll never know how much this means to me.
Thanks, Coach.
Thanks.
Have a good evening. Take care. Wow. Coach,
it's always a pleasure talking to. I shouldn't even call him Coach anymore. I should call him Coach and prolific author or published author.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was good, Nick. That was an insightful question you asked about Detroit when you're reading that other book. Detroit was, so booming, especially in the 50s.
Oh God, it was what was it like? It was top 5 in population. I think it was like maybe top 3.
Yeah, it was like almost pushing 2 million, I think, at one point.
Yeah,
it was. Gosh, it's just. Ugh.
Well, I'm fascinated by this partially because I'm tracing family genealogy, and I had like a great grandfather come, I think 100 years ago this September, to the United States, and much of it was in Detroit since the 20s. So I'm looking at old maps and like what do you call it? Like census data and like who's living where. And when I was growing up in Dearborn, my father prohibited me from going into Detroit back in the 80s. So, at least in the nighttime for sure. So it's like I never got a good feel for the city itself, even though I had family living there for decades. So
well, let us know if you find like some bootleggers in your backstory there or something. The Purple Gang or something.
Well, there's a lot of bakers and diner owners.
So,
and even to this day.
Yeah.
So
nice. Well, that was very fascinating. Coach Scott, as I mentioned earlier, Al will put the link to Ray's book in the show notes, and we'll figure out where you can get it from Amazon. And pick it up And like I say, it's not just a book about the NBA. If the NBA is your thing, of course, it's going to be fascinating. But if the 60s are your thing, this is another book that I think will fascinate you because of the people that Ray touched in that decade. It touched him also as well in the decade. So pick it up whenever you can. Al, we got some time here. We're going to do a little bit of chit chat here with the three of us.
Yeah, we haven't had a chance to talk any sports in about a month, give or take. And surprisingly, there was a fair amount going. I shouldn't say surprisingly, but while we were away, there was the NBA draft, NBA free agency. There was the NHL draft. The free agency is going on right now with that. Obviously, the Tigers are an ongoing. Are they or aren't they in contention for the division right now? Who's to say at this point? So, there's a few things we can touch on. We have a little bit of time before we wrap things up. We got to. So we have honestly, we have plenty of time because we get wordy. We go 2 hours, so no big deal. But let's touch on the Red Wings first. They seem to be making the most news. And there was a couple things. Obviously, we touched a little bit on the free agent signings he made when we were talking about. But I think the most surprising maybe or controversial news was former first-round pick Filip Zadina asked for a trade. And as you guys brought up before we started recording, that Zadina was famously known for he's going to fill up the net with pucks against the teams that passed him over, because I believe he dropped the 6th in the draft, and at the time Ken Holland snapped him up, and he's for the most part just been a serviceable role player since he's come up to the Wings. Well, he was placed on waivers by GM Steve Yzerman this past week, and this is after he asked for a trade, and instead Yzerman just put him on waivers and said, okay, let's see someone wants you. Apparently no one did, because he was placed on he was not picked up while he was on waivers, so he became the Wings property again, but that also meant the Wings were free to send him to the AHL, the Grand Rapids Griffins, which I believe looks like was going to be their plan unless he played out of his mind in training camp. And it really looked like he's on the outs. It looks like, and it's gone both ways, because today TSN is reporting that Zadina will refuse to report to the AHL in Grand Rapids, and that would allow the Wings to terminate his contract because he would be in violation. That means there would be no salary cap penalty, no buyout penalty. Essentially, they would just place him back on waivers, which, according to, I believe, Elliot Friedman, that would happen tomorrow at noon if they do it. And at that point, it sounds like a very acrimonious divorce. Are you kind of surprised, Greg and Nick, that the Wings have had a falling out like this with one of their players?
Well, it is kind of out of character for the organization to have such an acrimonious parting of the ways. However, the administration, if you will, that brought him to Detroit is gone, and right. Steve Yzerman took over a year after Zadina was drafted. And let's be frank. I mean, all you have to do is go to hockeyreference.com. You don't even have to go through any sort of like crazy special metrics. Just look at the production. 190 games. Yep. 28 goals. 28 goals in 190 games, which over like if you spread it out like a 82 game season, it's like 12 goals a year or something.
That's not filling up the net with pucks.
No, not at all. And he wasn't good defensively. He wasn't. He didn't do anything that kind of made up for the lack of offensive production. But regardless, he was drafted you mentioned 6th overall. Why? Because they thought they were getting a goal scorer.
Yep.
I mean, they didn't draft him for his defense anyway. So it wasn't like, but he just didn't produce. And, I don't think it's, when a guy like Yzerman, I don't know if it's necessarily acrimonious on Yzerman's part.
Yeah.
He's just trying to build the best roster that he can. And any acrimony would have to be coming from Zadina. It's not like they didn't give this guy a shot. Now,
essentially he's pissing away $5 million if he does this.
He played 74 games in the 21-22 season, which was the most games he played. He scored 10 goals. He was minus 24. And then the rest of the production wasn't there. Last year he played 30 games and scored 3 goals. And I don't know. I don't know what he's thinking, Zadina's thinking in terms of not reporting. If he's going to make himself available to the rest of the NHL, well, that's his prerogative.
Yeah.
I just don't know where he's going to get. I don't know where he's going to land, and if I don't even know if this is a change of scenery situation. Sometimes guys, go somewhere else, but I think guys, somebody's played almost 200 games in the NHL, and is scoring at such a weak rate. I kind of think that's what he is. But hey, I'm not mad at anybody. I mean, sometimes you hit on these draft picks, sometimes you don't. But I just don't. I'm not sure what Zadina's game plan is here. But unless there was something indeed that happened on a more personal level that he doesn't feel like he can prosper in the Red Wings organization, I don't know. But the bottom line is, from Yzerman's standpoint, it would almost be derelict of Yzerman to not do what he did, because the production just wasn't there.
Yeah.
And I kind of look at it like, okay, this is a young kid. He's a little bit mercurial. You can see he's a little bit. I was hoping when he said, "I'm going to fill the puck with fill the net with pucks." Sorry, not the other way around. That he'd have a chip on his shoulder and go out and start like scoring.
Right.
The other possibility is he's full of bluster and doesn't do anything and feels entitled. And I honestly like a lot of the things that Yzerman does and sets the tone for the teams. Like, okay, we're in a rebuilding mode. We're going to go with a lot of young guys, but damn it, you're going to compete. You're going to earn your ice time.
Right.
You're not being. It's not like honestly, the Tigers always talk about Torkelson's their number one, what do you call it, is their first baseman. Yeah. It's like, don't give it to him. Make him earn it. It's not his to lose. It's his to earn. Yeah. But so Yzerman's setting that tone, and I think that's the right tone to set. And Zadina doesn't like that pushback, probably. Could it be that change of scenery helps? It could. Because maybe his mind is poisoned with the organization. He doesn't think he'll ever prosper there, and his head's never going to be in the game to play with the team. Yeah. So.
Yeah, because it's obvious Yzerman thought there was something there, because he gave him a contract extension last year, 3 years, and he's probably going to walk away from 2 years of it and $5 million. That feels like cutting off your nose to spite your face. If you're that miserable that you're willing to walk away from $5 million, that's. As you said, that's talk about mercurial.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I think your ego is driving your decisions, and usually your ego doesn't have much of a brain. So, it could be that he goes somewhere else and somebody gives him a chance, and he's going to get frustrated because that new organization is going to say, you're going to have to compete for ice time with these other guys. Yeah. So I got a lot of other guys wanting to play too.
Well, don't forget, Nick, that there are 31 other teams or whatever there are in the league that see this, and when a kid like this who's 25 years old, 26, whatever he is, says, "I'm not going to," we don't. In fairness, we don't know if this is true. This is being reported by TSN, but if he indeed decides not to report to Grand Rapids, it's not exactly a good look for him league-wide either.
Right.
I mean, you can have a change of scenery, yes, but you have to be given the opportunity to have a change of scenery. And I don't know if any team that looks at the production this kid's been producing, and then on top of it, he says, "I'm not going to report." I don't know if that makes him all that attractive to other teams, frankly.
I don't think so either. It's a totally different ball game if he was a 20-30 goal scorer and mercurial and didn't want to play for your team anymore.
Right.
The Wings could waive him, and then someone will pick him up,
right,
and take a chance on him. But I mean, like the numbers you reported, I think that's even less than 10 goals a year.
Yeah.
That you're the fourth line backup on certain days, but that's it. So you're not going to see much ice time.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the other hot rumor that is picking up, because people were complaining, as we mentioned earlier, that Yzerman did pick up some certain legit NHL players in free agency, especially like forwards like Comfer. But none of them were needle movers on offense. At most, these guys, you probably expect these guys to maybe give you 20 goals. They really need more than that desperately. I mean, Greg, we've talked about this for a couple years, more than a couple years at this point, about how the Wings just can't score. Well, there was a lot of talk that Alex Brincat is still on the market, and the Wings are kind of playing hardball. And supposedly, it's coming down between the Red Wings and the Islanders for his services. And it likely means that it's going to cost the Wings a fair amount of draft capital, probably a first-round pick, maybe a second, a player. We really don't know. From all accounts, though, Yzerman's playing some hardball here. And we all know he holds his cards very close to his vest. But do you think the Brincat is the needle mover this team? Greg, do you think this is the needle mover this team needs?
Well, probably not.
Yeah.
Somebody on Twitter said, "Well, I'm glad to see. I like the Comfer signing because now he's reunited with Larkin, and I said, well, how did that work out with Kopp?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he was another U of M guy, and hey, this is one of those things where we need to take off our Yzerman glasses for a second and say, where does this make sense? Where does a guy like Comfer make sense? Now, is he another, younger version of Perron, or where he'll maybe give you 20, 22, 24 goals? You're not gonna game plan for this guy. He's not. I'm not saying he's a bad hockey player. I'm not suggesting that at all. But if you look at the term and the dollars that Yzerman gave this guy, it just seems like an overpay to me. And I don't know if Yzerman thinks that there's more that Comfort can give you than what he's given the Avalanche. Keeping in mind that the Avalanche is a much more talented team, and Comfort's numbers may have been affected by the fact that he's part of a great team, and so that you're may not necessarily have the production you might have on a lesser team, if that makes any sense. But it's hard right now. We were talking about this before. It's hard. There aren't really that many, Al or Nick. There aren't really that many guys anymore that are available via anything. You almost have to draft scorers. It's hard to trade for them. It's really hard to trade for scorers because scoring is at a premium, and it's also hard to sign them because these teams, once they get the feel that they've got something with these guys, they lock them up for long-term contracts. So it's rare that they even hit free agency. Back in the salad days of the early 2000s, where you could pick up a Brett Hull, you could pick up a Luke Robertson, you could pick up a Dominik Hasek, you could pick up guys like that, Darian Hatcher before he got hurt, Curtis Joseph, big name guys that were available via free agency. That's not really the case anymore. It's very hard to acquire bona fide NHL goal scorers from other NHL teams, whether it be from trade or from free agency. But the Red Wings also haven't been bad enough, and they haven't had the puck luck at the draft lottery to move into the top 3 to 5 players, which is where the goal scorers are. Everybody below 5 is not going to be a franchise player. It's just not going to happen. Those kind of players, the Bedards of the world and so forth, and Matthews and the kid at Edmonton, whose name escapes me,
McDavid.
Those are top 1, 2, 3 picks. They're gone. They're gone by 9, long gone. So, but I just think that there needs to be a little bit more critical thinking about the moves Yzerman's made. You mentioned it earlier, Al, about maybe it was Kopp you mentioned about Kopp when we were off there. I mean, it's not everything this guy does Yzerman turns to gold. Let's finally admit that. Let's just admit that not everything, and he shouldn't. Yeah. And that's it. It's unrealistic anyway. I'm not mad at him for some of these moves not working out, but let's just be realistic about that. Let's just say that there are some things that Steve's done that he probably would like not to do if he had another chance.
I'm going to add to that. Like, so you do have the great players get tied up and they're rarely available. So then the next question is, how do you build your team when you don't have one of those guys?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So in the Wings case, they've done two things, and I think they should do these two things. Number one is draft and develop. That's long term. You don't know. Honestly, you pick a guy, you do your best homework, and do they even make it to your team? You'll know in about 3 years, if not longer. So in the meantime, what do? You try and take a proven NHL player, even though they're not like very newsworthy, and you put them on the team. That they'll be far better than a rookie often. So, and they'll perform better. So, because you have to field a competitive team every year. I think that's a problem. That's the thing with the GM, and that's kind of why the Tigers in their rebuild rubs me the wrong way. It's just kind of an idiotic strategy that they had. And then the Pistons are suffering from that too. It's like no veteran, seasoned league players. So should he have made some of those signings? I'm sure there are plenty that are regrettable. The thing is he going to double down when he finds out, okay, this isn't working out, or try and move them, for instance, and make changes? So I think it's going to be a lot of trial and error to speed everything up. But if he actually, makes those changes, that's what a good GM will do.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I guess the other fear with the Brincat is he's tiny. He's 5'8", 170, something like that. And there's been a lot of talk that if you look at who I's been loaded up with this year, he loaded up with bigger physical players, and we've seen the Wings get manhandled at times this past year. So this is obviously a top line winger if you pick up the Brincat. So that's obviously a concern as well. Is that he's small, and if you're that small, you better score a hell of a lot of goals. Like I said, he's a 40-goal scorer, but last year I think he only had 28. So
well, you know what they haven't done also? The other thing they haven't done, and maybe it was unrealistic to expect that they would continue to do this, but what they also haven't done in many, many years is uncover those diamonds in the rough that they used to always uncover in Europe with Håkan Andersson and his scouting staff would always. If you look at the Red Wings, some of the great Red Wings players that have come through from the homegrown players that have come through the system in the 90s and beyond, and you look at where they were drafted. And I think we've done this before. We've run this exercise before in this program. We've looked at where some of the Dotsiks of the world and Zetterbergs of the world, where they've been drafted, and they've been drafted low. Yeah. And the Red Wings haven't been able to do that lately. The
NHL was.
It doesn't have to be Europe either, by the way. I mean, they haven't been able to find any guys that they've hit on in the lower rounds. And again, maybe this is unrealistic to expect that they would, because they were doing it for so long with so many great players. Even Nick Lidstrom wasn't really drafted all that high. But, but they haven't done that. They haven't been able to. I'm not sure if the rest of the league caught up to them.
I think that's exactly it.
That's probably right.
The league saw, exactly. The rest of the Wings saw what the Wings had done, and now they are. Because you remember back then the area you're talking about, you had Don Cherry railing on Hockey Night in Canada, talking about how tough the Canadian players were compared to the softest Charmin Euro players and things like that. The NHL was a very xenophobic league back then, and the Wings were ahead of the curve. And as Nick said, that's no longer the case. I think every team's over there scouting and combing the bushes, and it's very rare. I think you're going to see a talented player sneak through the way the Wings were able to do so constantly back in the 90s.
Although I think they did let their I think they did let their scouting lapse. Mm-hmm. They didn't stay kind of strong with their scouting. Like, I think in the 80s they might have been better at scouting prospects and bringing in young guys.
Do you think the Wings just got complacent? Especially later on in Holland's tenure. I
don't know if it's complacent, but here's one thing that did change. In the 90s, there was no salary cap.
Right.
And Illich used to spend like a drunk sailor.
Mm-hmm.
He would pay to get the stars. I mean, he did that. He figured out to do that with the Tigers at some point too.
Mm-hmm.
Because all of this, let's grow everybody from the farm system, just that's a long-term project. But then come the salary cap, and then after, I think, 2004, and then they had to cut some of their good players. Mm-hmm. Now you're forced to draft well and scout much more. And, like, who have they really come up with? Occasional first-round pick, but it's hard. Who have they kept? Larkin. I think that's about it. And other guys came later, but so.
Yeah. I think what's all, I was just looking, as Nick was talking, I was looking up some of these guys and just to confirm what I already believed. And, Konstantinov drafted in the 11th round, Zetterberg drafted in the 7th round, Datsuk drafted in the 6th round, Nick Lidstrom drafted in the 3rd round. These are world-class players that were drafted nowhere near.
Oh, well, remember the skullduggery it took to get guys out, like with Peter Klima?
Right.
I mean, that was literally a spy movie, what they did with Peter Klima.
Right. So, but and Nick's right. The salary cap is certainly a factor, but the bottom line is that I don't know, and I don't know. I'm with Nick. I'm not sure I would necessarily use the word complacent, although I know where Al's going with that, because I think that there does seem to have been a loss of luster in the scouting of the Red Wings, and I can't really pinpoint why that necessarily is, but all I know is that they have not been able to find anyone in even lower than like the 2nd or 3rd round that's been a contributor. Because Nick's right. They did spend like a drunken sailor, Mike Ilitch did, but he was doing that with the guys like I just mentioned coming through the system. He would buy a Robitaille, he would buy a Hall. He would trade for a Hasek, but meanwhile, coming through the pipe were Lidstrom and Zetterberg and Datsuk and Konstantinov, and those are world-class players. Konstantinov was going to be a Hall of Famer if he didn't get hurt. I mean, there's no question about it. As far as I'm concerned, he would have been a surefire Hall of Famer. And these are guys that were world-class players. But it just I think what happens is other teams are just, because of the cap that Nick mentioned, are very judicious about how they spend their money, and they're going to spend it first on their young talent that they have, rather than scour the free agent market, because that's not the way it is anymore.
Yeah.
When was the last time a team won the Stanley Cup because they went out and signed a bunch of guys? And look at Seattle and Las Vegas. That's another indictment. These are two. And granted,
they were set up quite well to succeed, though. I was going
to say, they don't stockpile expansion teams like they did when you and I were growing up in the 70s. Yeah. But it's still, to me, it's still an indictment that teams like that weren't even in existence less than 10 years ago are winning Stanley Cups.
Yeah.
Winning Stanley Cups.
Yeah.
So here's one thing I heard about, and I didn't know this about Las Vegas. They don't have some like great goal scorer on that team, but they have a lot of good goal scorers, and they just play well.
Yeah.
So you don't have to have like a look, and in contrast that to Edmonton, I mean, McDavid is as good as it gets.
Right.
They couldn't make it out of the second round, I think.
Right.
The playoffs.
Right. And look at Austin Matthews. They can't get past the second round in Toronto either. Yeah,
exactly. And this came up during Yzerman's press conference recently after the free agent signings. And the point that was brought up actually by one of the reporters is, actually by Yzerman. It's like, you look at the teams that win, and what they have is depth.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just one or two good lines, and then it just falls off a cliff. They have depth. And then there's one other thing that the Wings are suffering from that we haven't mentioned yet. They may not have goal scorers, but when you give up 7 goals a game repeatedly, your defense stinks.
Yeah, it's not just your goaltender. Is still an issue. I mean, they signed essentially two veteran backup goaltenders in free agency. One who kind of made news for all the wrong reasons by not wearing a Pride Night jersey in Reimer. But the final line of defense of the Wings has been an issue for several years now when it comes to goal. And Yzerman is still trying to nail down these a 1A and 1B type goalie, and it looks like it works for a year or so, and then they fall off, and like we'll see what happens with Huso. Huso played fairly well last year, but none of the other goalies did. And then Huso got overworked, and the goals against went up, and things got kind of ugly at the end.
Right.
So, this team desperately needs a few elite pieces, and someone elite in goal, an elite goal scorer, and they might have some elite defensemen. That's obvious. Yzerman has been building up the blue line, but they still need needle movers, and this team desperately lacks that. And as you've both been saying, it's hard to find a needle mover when teams don't trade them, and you don't have any buck luck in the lottery.
You know what? Real quick to emphasize Nick's point, I just looked up Vegas Golden Knights last year, and they had 12 players who scored in double figures last year. And he's right. There was nobody who scored more than 28 goals. The Red Wings had 7 who scored in double digits. So they have 5 more guys score, and you might say, well, that doesn't seem like a lot, but that is. You have 5 more guys scoring in double figures.
Yeah, that's like at least 50 more goals.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and then add that to, like, I'm sure Vegas's defense was a hell of a lot better than Detroit's. I mean, the last 2 seasons, it's not the coaching, because they had 2 different coaches in the last 2 years. And around springtime, they were just getting throttled. It looked like a low-scoring football game instead of a hockey game. Yeah. They were giving up 10 and 12 goals. Then that can't all be the goalie.
Yeah. No, of course not.
I mean, the defense is just collapsed, basically.
Yeah.
All right. With that, let's talk about more good news. And I know we're all huge Tigers fans, but there was a very interesting article in the Metro Times. And say what you will about the politics of the Metro Times, it's still a decent paper with good writers. A lot of good freelancers. And for the example we're going to talk about is Joe Lapointe. Joe Lapointe is a former columnist for the Detroit Free Press. He's a former, I believe, a feature writer, sports writer for the damn New York Times. Now he's a freelancer, and he wrote he's been writing some freelance stuff for the Metro Times, and he wrote a fascinating article about the lack of as he puts it, the lack of maintenance in the frayed infrastructure at Comerica Park. And I was suddenly having flashbacks to how the Ilitches stopped maintaining Tiger Stadium completely,
right?
In their quest to get Comerica Park built. And he has pictures of things that are broken, the things that look awful. For example, remember the big deal the carousel was when it was built. Hasn't worked all damn year. You go into the bathrooms. There's no radio call anymore. There's broken TVs all over the concourse. He uses it even affects the play. The other day when Miguel Cabrera had a pitch clock violation, because he was looking at the wrong clock, and that clock was frozen at 34 or something like that. And I think, Greg, you made a great point about this when we were talking about it, about why wasn't this, we're the local guys on this.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. My first thought, it's funny when you mentioned it before we did the show, my first thought wasn't, gosh, what's going on at Comerica Park?
Yeah.
My first thought was, gosh, what's going on with the Detroit sports media?
Yeah.
This is another example, and maybe I look at it through a different lens than maybe the average fan, and I probably do, because of the journalist inside me. But this is the kind of a story that should be broken by somebody who is in town. Yeah. Joe Lapointe, granted, he is like you said, he is a former Detroit guy. He was in Detroit for many, many years. As a matter of fact, for a while, he was really known more for he would cover radio and TV for the Free Press. He was like he was the guy that would cover the TV and radio media with his observations about, how the games were broadcast and so forth, which was interesting. But he also used to cover the Red Wings, and he was also kind of a beat writer at times as well. And like you said, he went to New York and is now a freelancer. But so he does, in fairness, he does have Detroit ties, so I can understand why.
Yeah, and he's got bona fides. This is not a hack we're talking about.
Right. But what I'm saying is something like of this to this degree, which, by the way, this is literally the first I've heard about Comerica Park having any sort of issues. And the fact that it's being brought to light by Joe Lapointe
in the Metro Times.
Right. As opposed to anyone who is on this beat in the city, to me, is just another indictment of like, where has all the good reporting gone? Where has all the good sports reporting gone? There's nobody in town, Al, that breaks these kinds of stories.
Yeah.
And or if they do, worse yet, they're not reporting it.
Yeah.
I mean, I have to think that the stuff that LaPointe is talking about is stuff that these Detroit sports writers know and just haven't had the temerity to write about it. That's my opinion.
Yeah.
Do you think it's possible that they just got so used to it that they don't say it, don't even think about it? Or I don't know if the normal Detroit reporters or the current Detroit reporters, they're treated differently or have like different experience.
Well, the thing is, how often would those beat writers like McCloskey and Petzold and Stavenhagen be out in the concourse and be in the public bathrooms and that sort of thing? I think that's the problem with some of these guys, is that they're insulated from this. Yeah, so you're kind of right about this. And that I think they're insulated from these infrastructure issues because they spend the majority of their time in the press box and in the locker room. And for example, the locker room reportedly had a whole bunch of money thrown at it this past offseason. When they were also changing the fences around in the outfield and things like that. So I really think it's because those beat writers are sheltered. And I agree with Greg. I think these guys aren't looking for stories, especially the beat writers. Columnists, this is something that I think would be more on a columnist or a feature writer. The beat guys do kind of have their hands full with the day-to-day grind of covering the team and what's going on with the just with the players and management and in front office. But this stuff that LaPointe brought up, and he has lots of pictures as proof. This is something that someone in the local media should have brought up. It doesn't have to be. It also doesn't have to be the papers. It could have been 97-1 The Ticket, for example, or something like that.
What's so ironic about this, Al, is that when the team is having the kind of season that it's having, okay, and has had for the last several years, typically what happens is when that kind of thing goes on, when the on-field product is so bad, that's where. And you mentioned a few moments ago we were talking about the Red Wings and their drafting. You used the word complacent. This is the true meaning of complacent, because when you have a scenario where the product on the field is lousy, that's usually where the soil is fertile for you to start writing about other things or start looking for other things. Because how often, I mean, it's got to be monotonous. So how many times can you say that the team stinks? Okay. So that's usually when you start you might start to look for something else to write about. Yeah. And this would be this would be under that category. Well, okay, we all know the team stinks on the field, but guess what? I found out that the ballpark stinks too, and here's why. But you've raised this before, Al. We were talking. I'm not sure if we were talking to Paige or who we were talking to in recent weeks. But you were saying that it might have been Paige. I can't remember. You said something to the effect of, "Is it? Do you think these writers are afraid of having their press credential pulled?"
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, it's but it's like the only time I notice Chris McCoskey is when he's arguing with people on Twitter, for example, when they make a snarky comment or something. The beat writers, for the most part in this town, are very. I do like Stavenhagen, but he doesn't write every day because and I've noticed he's starting to write big picture stuff with MLB because of the cuts at The Athletic that I'm paying for, and they're cutting writers over there. I could go on a rant about this stuff, about how bad the local media is for the most part. Specifically the newspapers in town. And it is just so frustrating that the news or the free press isn't on top of stuff like this. And it takes the little left-wing Metro Times to put a light on this. And it's not going to get as big of a light as if one of the big two papers were talking about this stuff, or some of the other stuff that goes on with the Detroit Tigers that, but let me add this, though. Does this give you that the Tigers seem to be not putting money into Comerica Park? Is this starting to give you vibes that they're starting to grease the skids? Like, hey, we might want, we may need some help and upgrades. We may want to refurbish the stadium. We want some public money. That's the kind of vibes I'm starting to get, because they're going to use the excuse, oh, look at this place, it's falling apart. We need public money. And I have a feeling that I don't know if this is going to happen, but we've seen it over and over again in sports where teams look at Oakland Alameda and what a dive that became, because the A's owner refused to put any money in that place. And now he's having a $1 billion stadium built for him in Las Vegas, screwing over a legendary fan base in Oakland. So again, I don't know if it's a Chris Ilitch thing, because he has done nothing to impress me at all as the Tigers owner at this point. But this is a very, very bad look all the way around for the Tigers, for Comerica Park, and for the local media.
I would say that I don't know what the intention is. It could very well be something like that. It could be some other reason why all of this is happening. Mm-hmm. But it kind of the overall message you get without hearing anything else to the contrary is, I don't give a crap what fans in the city think about this team. I'm going to do it this way.
Yes.
My product on the field has been lousy for several years, and it's not going to get any better anytime soon. But come to the games. Oh, and I won't. But we won't fix anything at the games too, and make that as give you a reason to spend the amount of money you're going to spend at the game.
Exactly. They're shitting on the fans.
Well, the thing is, this is not an isolated. What gets me going on this is this is not an isolated incident. Al and I have talked about this before, where stories have been broken, and it's not been stories like this about infrastructure, but stories have been broken in the past about teams in Detroit,
coaching hires, player movement, things
that have not been broken by Detroit guys. Okay, and the most recent example, Al, and you'd have to help me out on this, and it's okay if we can't think of it, but there was an example a couple months ago where there was a story broken by an outsider. And you and I were like, "Where's the Detroit guys on this? Mm-hmm. Why is this being brought to light by somebody who who we don't even know the last time they set foot in the city?"
Yeah,
and so this is not like a one-off. This has been going on for a while now, where you just wonder. We talked to Bob Page earlier today in an interview that's rolling into this program, or putting into this program, and Bob said, boy, if I had Twitter back in the day, or we had Twitter back in the day, somebody said I'd have 250,000 followers. Well,
you'd have more. Probably.
Back then, you had guys like Al Ackerman, and if Al Ackerman got wind of this, if Al Ackerman got wind of the fact that the stadium was in the kind of shape that it is allegedly in, then Al would be he'd be nightly, every night at 11:17 p.m. giving you the latest example with video. Latest example of the condition the Tiger Stadium would be in, and he wouldn't give a shit who on the Tigers, if he cared, if he ruffled feathers or not, because Al would never say anything to you on the air that he wouldn't say to your face.
Right.
I have a feeling like the Detroit writers are about as compromised as White House correspondents are. They'll never talk critically about the administration. Because they will kind of cut off access, right?
Yes.
And then intimidate the mothership.
Yep.
Yeah.
Afterwards. Well, let me ask you guys this. I mean, I just brought up the Tigers score, and there was a lot of talk going into this Oakland series that this is a team the Tigers can sweep, or they should be able to, at the very least, win this series. And this is like, they can really make a move in the Central. Well, I just checked the score. It's 9-0 Oakland in the 7th.
Yeah.
Does this kind of surprise me? Does this feel like the Tigers' Waterloo now? Is like, okay, can we stop this farce that they're actually seriously going to compete, even make it to 500? They have to make it to 500, I think, to win the division, or even to even make a sniff the division. Can we stop with this farce that this team can actually play meaningful baseball into August and September? Even when you can't beat the Athletics, and you haven't scored a run against the Athletics as of right now in 17 innings. Last night's game was in extra innings. Can we just put can we just say, okay, let's get, Eduardo Rodriguez, you got to go. Michael Lorenzen, you got to go. Let's bring up some kids, things like this, because this is giving me vibes, Greg, of the Ottawa series the 2 games in Ottawa the Wings played. Where, yes, they were in the wild card slot for like 16 hours, and then they got destroyed by Ottawa, and Yzerman's like, yeah, we're selling.
Yeah, no, I know it may sound a little, dramatic to say things like that about one series in July, but this is, and I know that even the crappy teams are going to get their 45 to 55 wins, but you've gone on like I think 16 innings now, 17 innings without scoring a run against this,
essentially a glorified AAA team.
Right. And of course it's not a good look. I mean, it's not a good look against anyone, but it's especially not a good look against the A's. Yeah. Now, but what fallout would there be? I mean, what would you have happen as a result of this? I mean, just, more pitching pneumonia. Nothing's going to really change. I guess Scott Harris was in the TV booth tonight. I don't know what he said, but I guess they brought him in the booth tonight. In the
hell of a game to do it.
Yeah, right. And somebody said that he was talking about the little thing they do when they hit home runs, when they put the hockey helmet on.
Yeah.
That's going to go over real well, I'm sure.
Yes, in a 9-0 game.
Oh God,
jeez.
I'm not surprised that they're playing poorly against Oakland. Somehow, the Tigers seem to do the worst against the teams they should beat the easiest. Mm-hmm. Like Oakland's, at the bottom of the league, and somehow the Tigers cannot do anything. But you got to remember, Tigers had a historically bad offense last year.
Yeah.
And this year they're not that much better overall.
Right.
And I'm going to use an old stat of batting average. Like, they stink. Batting average, fine, it's an incomplete stat, but that means they're not getting a hit. Yeah. Which means they're not getting on base. And they're probably still flailing away at the ball. Maybe
right now the Tigers they're being one hit right now, the Tigers. Oh. Zach McKinstry has their sole hit tonight. Oh. They got a one walk. So they're just flooding the bases with runners tonight. Good Lord.
Right. Oh,
and what pitching staff can keep up with that? The Tigers pitchers can do fine, and there's no way to win though if you don't score.
Yeah, it's just frustrating that at the very least that we have a segment of the fan base trying to convince them. So, we hear it on local radio as well. Again, 97-1, which is as bad as it gets. And they're saying, the Tigers are, they're only 5 games out. They could still do something. I think they're being half serious, half sarcastic, but they're so desperate for something good to talk about. They're actually rooting for the Tigers to be good.
Well, that's why I pushed back against Page when he was saying he was
the loyalty thing. Yes,
bemoaning the loyalty thing. I said, Bob, what do you want them to be loyal to?
Yeah,
I mean, this is a perfect example. He's down there as we speak. Bob's at the game tonight. What do you want them to be loyal to? So the past 7-8 years now, it's been just very bad baseball. Bad. And I don't know what is the motivating factor to get off your duff and get in the car and drive downtown to see these clowns play. I don't know what, you can be as loyal as you want.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people that are loyal to them, by the way, on television. Just because they're not going to the ballpark, doesn't mean they're not loyal.
Yeah.
Now I don't know what the TV ratings are. I don't even do TV ratings anymore. If that's even a metric that they use anymore.
Yeah.
But I'm sure that those are down too. I mean, I've watched probably 5 innings the whole year combined because of nonsense like what's going on tonight.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. It's I don't know. It's just so. Yeah. The loyalty. I mean, Bob's gonna Bob. That's who he is when it comes. But I'm with you. I'm actually shocked that fans are paying as much attention as they are, considering this is year 7 of this for the most part with the Tigers. I mean, the Pistons haven't won a playoff series since 2009. The Wings haven't won a series since 2015, 2016. Obviously the Lions are the Lions, even though they did play some football that meant something late in the year last year, but I don't know. I'm not. I'll just say I'm not one to tell people how to fan. I've learned that lesson a long time ago.
Yeah.
Saying that you need to root for a team no matter what. I think it's a two-way street, and we're kind of seeing this with some of these teams that that especially the Tigers, it's not a two-way street. It's essentially the Tigers are throwing a crap product on the field for the last more than like 7 years at this point, and still asking people to watch on television and to come in stadium. And don't even get me going on the TV product and Matt Shepard, who was completely out of his element. I mean if you have MLB.TV, watch the road broadcast compared to the Tigers broadcast. And I feel like I get more from a game watching a road telecast compared to Matt Shepard's story time with Kirk Gibson or something. So it's just I wish this fan base would just come to a tipping point and just lose their shit over this. Instead of, they're only 5 games out. They're going to be like 11 games under 500 after tonight. You're 11 games under 500. You're not a contender. You're a pretender, and you should be selling. And Rodriguez comes back and gets shelled. So yay, boys. That's I don't know, Greg. We've been railing about the Tigers for how long now? Like 7-8 years at this point, where they've been struggling.
Well, you know what? I know,
and we pretty much said it all for the most part.
I know the Central Division stinks. I get it, but at the end of when all's said and done, the Twins will probably win it. Will probably be 7 to 8 games above 500, probably. Yeah. And the Tigers will probably finish 17 or 18 games out. I mean, that's probably what's going to happen. This nonsense about, it's July 5th and they're 4 back in the loss column, and because the Twins, I don't believe you're going to ever see a time where a team's going to win a division with under 500 record.
Right.
I just don't think it's going to happen because, first of all, the Twins are going to play. I know they don't have as much of a imbalanced schedule as they used to have, but they're still going to be playing a lot of the Central Division teams. And I got to think that sooner or later the Twins are going to probably bob above 500 and stay there. Yep. Probably win 84 to 86 games, probably, and the Tigers will probably win 68 to 70. So there's your difference. So none of this. They're in the mix and they could win they could get in the play at baloney. Absolutely not.
Yeah. Well, on the plus side, at least Lions training camp starts in like 2 weeks. They're going to give us something to talk about. Oh my God! Can you just wait for the Lions overload, guys? Because that's all we're going to hear about from August on. Considering what the other teams are like in this town. So, anyway, anything else you want to touch on before we start wrapping things up?
No, but this Lions thing is fascinating to me.
Yes,
it's not just local people who are drinking the Kool-Aid. I think I tweeted out a week or two ago. I said, "Geez, I didn't know that they sold blue Kool-Aid outside of Michigan. I thought it was more of a Fagel thing because I'm seeing now national people hop on board now, and start to look at the Lions as the darlings." They're the trendy pick. Let's face it. They're the kind of team that'll probably end up on the cover of Sports Illustrated somewhere during the preseason. Sports Illustrated will pick them to win the division. The Sports Illustrated will pick them to go to the NFC Championship game. They're the trendy pick. They're the sexy pick right now. Dan Campbell is, everybody loves Dan Campbell. Yep. And they love the 8-2 finish and blah blah blah. And how this team is going to respond to those kinds of expectations when they're no longer the lovable Lions, lovable losers, is going to be fascinating to me. They even were talking about putting them on Hard Knocks again. Yeah. 2 years in a row. I mean, come on.
Yeah. I mean, we've gone through enough of these ups and downs. The Lions have an above 500 season, and then the very next year they usually can't reproduce that even.
Right.
Even though there's high hopes because they get a tougher schedule and the tougher teams beat them. Yeah. Even during the Wayne Fonts era, you seem like every other year they had a good year, and in between that they had lousy years because their schedules got tougher and their record got worse. So yeah. I'd like the Lions' chances. I think they put together a pretty darn good team. But I still have PTSD from like another one bites the dust
Or what was it? Lomas Brown that predicted the victory in Philadelphia in the playoffs,
God, yes.
and then they got smoked like 54-30 or something like that. It's that's the thing. Us older fans who have been through the ringer with this team, we still wait for the other shoe to drop. We really do. While you got the younger generation of fans who are they're all in on this team because they haven't had to deal with Russ Thomas and what was this? The other Oscar Schmidt, Chuck Schmidt. Chuck Schmidt, yes, Chuck Schmidt. The power struggle he had with was it Venisi? Mike? Yes, So the bean counter went out over the football guy. That was so Lions back in the day. I'm like you guys. I'm hoping for the best, but when it comes to the Lions, I always expect the worst. And like we got it last year with Seattle winning that controversial game that knocked the Lions out of the playoffs, for example. Who else has that happened to? Always happens to the Lions. So I completely agree with you that it's going to get kind of ugly. I think we're going to get tired of it. But what else is there going to be to talk about in this town? Well, especially once the trade deadline goes by in baseball. I mean, we right now are really in a dead period. Now the Pistons have pretty much dried. The news has dried up. They've done their thing. I mean, they've used up all their cap space in trades. Yep. And then the Wings, other than the Brincat stuff, I think they're pretty much done making moves unless they get him. So all we have left, guys, is horrible baseball and Lions training camp. That's kind of depressing to think about when you get down to it.
That's when you got to go looking at college football a little bit.
Oh, we are getting close to that, aren't we?
Yeah. I got mixed feelings about the college game these days, the older I get.
Well, what are your mixed feelings?
I like college football, but I hate the NCAA, and it's kind of this the whole bullshit pretense of we're amateur league now.
Right.
I like the NIL money, and I don't want to hear a coach, a successful coach whining about it.
Yeah.
Because once they create violations and jump to another team, the old team is screwed, but they go on their merry way.
Yeah.
So I don't mind players having some leverage there too.
Yeah. What's getting me also is the team is like the latest drama is San Diego State wants to go to the Pac-12, but I don't think they have an invitation. And the Mountain West says, you've already said you're leaving. You're gone. It's like $37 million. And it's like that's really become the big news in college and sports anymore. It's really going who's going to end up as a have and who's going to end up as a have not. Because when the big news is TV deals and conference shift, how conference are shifting around their getting rid of divisions, for example, and going back to the best two teams we have be in the championship game, and as you said, NIL and all the different. You have states trying to pass different laws, and the NCAA and their ultimate hubris is trying to put a cap on all this stuff. It's absolutely hilarious. I'm with you there, Nick. One of the worst entities in sports. The NCAA. They are the biggest bunch of hypocrites on the planet. They're up there with the FIA.
Yeah, I'm almost nihilistic anymore about college athletics. I'm almost to the point where I don't even care if they go to class. I don't even care if these kids even attend one class.
They're literally professionals at this point.
I don't care, and I'm with Nick. I like the NIL money as well. But I don't even care. I really don't. If these guys, if they graduate, if they attend a class, it's gotten to the point now where it's like, let's just drop this pretense. And I know that's not going to get any attraction, what I just said, because there's still a lot of idealistic people out there that believe that these kids are going to, should go and get their degree and what have you. And it's true. I mean, you do have to have a future. I get it. You're not going to, I understand that. Very few people are going to play in the NFL. And even if you do play in the NFL, you still need to have a future. I understand that.
Yeah.
But I don't care. I really don't care if these kids, if they bop around and change schools every other year, and if they attend class, if they don't attend class. I mean, I don't care. I mean, because I think that the genie's been out of the bottle, and I don't know how.
Well, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. I have no problem with the players doing whatever they can to protect their interests. Hell, if you ask me, they should have a players' association at this point.
I think they were trying to unionize, and maybe the California players, I think, were successful at that, and the NCAA kind of lost their shit over it.
Yes.
So.
Hey, NCAA losing their shit's a good thing, if you ask me. You know, essentially, they're going to Congress trying to do something about this. But if they had actually done the right thing 30 years ago, we wouldn't be at this point. But they tried that. They kept throwing that bullshit amateurism out there for decade after decade, screwing over the players. You know, essentially holding that. The scholarship over their heads, because realistically, a scholarship is a 1-year contract that can be pulled at any time. So it's, you know, at this point, I'm with Nick. I love watching college football on Saturdays, but I have to, I have to put that little voice in the back of my head saying, what an ugly business it really is. But then again, I do the same thing with the NFL. I do the same thing with Major League Baseball and all the other major sports. They're we've paid attention long enough. We know how the sausage is made with these leagues, yet we still watch. And I guess, hell, I'm not thrilled what's going on with the PGA and the Saudis, but I still watch the US Open, you know? So if that makes me a hypocrite, because as I like, as the old saying goes, capitalism makes hypocrites of us all. And with that, you guys ready to wrap up this show? Us three hypocrites?
Yep.
All right. With that, we're not going to mess with any jerks of the week. Right. We never do with our anniversary show. So with that, Nick, anything you want to tell us where people can find you on Twitter and things like that?
Yeah. Really simple. It's Nick Milanovich. Yep. So I'm on there probably too much, talking Detroit sports most of the time. So, so yeah. That's the only one I do. Professionally, I have some others, but that's not relevant here. So.
And Greg, you need to get the word out about your newsletter, your Substack.
Yeah, let's talk about Substack. GregEno.substack.com. Just Google Greg Eno and Substack and use that search string, and you'll find it. I come to you in your inbox if you subscribe. Pretty much every Monday or Tuesday. I'd be appreciative if you would do that right now. All content is free as of right now, so get in while the getting's good. I also want to thank, of course, Bob Page, who we talked to earlier in the day and rolled that interview for you. That was a lot of fun. Thank, of course, Coach Scott. Al will put the link to Coach Scott's book in the show notes. I want to also let everybody know that we will be talking with Red Wings radio voice Ken Cal on August the 2nd, which, by the way, is the next episode of the D-Jerks. We're going to, summer vacations are rearing their head. Al won't be with us in Michigan in a couple weeks, so we'll do August 2nd with Ken. I'll be on vacation after that, so Nick will fill in for me August 15th or 16th. And by the way, I just want to let everybody know that Nick, who did such a wonderful job filling in for me last year, will continue to be, we call him the third jerk, but he will continue to be popping up here on occasion, whether it's in place of me or with me, frankly. We may do an occasional 3-man booth, so get used to Nick. You'll follow him on Twitter. And I want to thank my lovely wife, Sharon, for putting up with this nonsense. And thank you, Big Al, for making Wednesday nights, in this case, so gosh darn fun.
Yes. It's nice to have a third wheel. But yeah, Greg, I just want to give a shout out. It's been a great, we've known each other online for about 16, 17 years at this point. We've been doing the podcast for more than 14, and it's been fun. It really has been. And I know Bob brags about us not meeting in person, but that's just how life seems to work, unfortunately. But we have our nice little talks on Skype, and we're all on Facebook and things like that. So it's not like we don't stay in touch between shows. But again, it's been a wonderful 14 years. Like I said, we wouldn't do this if we didn't enjoy it, because not like we're making any money on this, and our listenership isn't quite what it used to be, especially when we both had bully pulpits. Like when I was writing for Bless You Boys, and and Greg was was still working in journalism. Right. So but we do this because it's fun, and we meet great people like Nick. So or the coach and Bob Page, and if you had told me 15 years ago I would get to talk to Ken Cal, I said, what the hell are you talking about? And this will be his. No, I don't know. We've had him on the show several times at this point.
We've had a lot of people on this program. Oh, I mean, a lot. I mean, Jack McCloskey and Jim Brandstatter and Eli Zared and Page and You name it. We've had.
Remember the late great Jamie Samuelson would always make an annual appearance.
We've had so many people that we would never have, like you said, never been able to talk to if it wasn't for the podcast. And
yes.
I'm just trying to go off the top of my head of some of the names of people we've talked, even some oddball people. Like remember one time we had the guy Marvin Hagler Jr. That was a fun interview.
Earl Shores of the electric football.
Electric football, absolutely.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, so many.
Yes. So I'm glad you're in on the fun, Nick.
Yeah,
it is fun. It is fun.
But I'll give a shout out to Linda, who's actually up north right now rescuing our boat, one of our boats, as it kind of got loose from the dock after we left. So she's off and she was so worried about it, she drove back up there just to retie the boat down so it wouldn't go down the lake. So way to go, Linda. But again, thank you, Nick. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Coach, who is a big time author at this point. And I think, I need to tell you where you can find us on, Greg, you get us our Twitter links and that sort of thing.
Oh, yeah.
It's been so long since we've done this.
I know. You forget. Yes. At the Knee Jerks, at Greg, as far as my Twitter goes. And so Al, take it away.
And of course, if you want to listen to the show, we're on pretty much anywhere podcasts are aggregated, specifically places like Apple Podcasts. We're on YouTube, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Google Play, Amazon Music, Deezer. If you listen to us on Stitcher, they are closing their doors. So I believe they're being.
Oh, are they?
Yes. Yeah. So we will. So you can. If in another month or so, you will no longer be able to listen to the show on Stitcher, but there are so many other places to listen to podcasts. It's not really going to be that big of a deal. But if you're online, just type in the Knee Jerks, Eno and Big Al, or just Eno and Big Al. That'll tell you where you need to go. Our homepage is thekneejerks.net. That's where all the links to the social media and Coach's book and that sort of thing will all be there, and all the stories we talk about will be linked to there as well. So I think that's about time to wrap it up, because I need to turn my air conditioner back on because I'm starting to sweat. So,
at least you have an air conditioner.
Like 6 feet away. All right. So, Greg, I'll see you in 2 weeks. Nick, I'll see you in about a month.
Right.
And so something like that.
You'll see me in about a month, and Nick in about.
And see Nick in 6. Yeah.
6 weeks. Yeah.
I can't do math anymore. Oh my God. Anyway. So until this time, August 2nd, correct?
Correct, yes.
Yeah, August 2nd, when we talk to Ken Cal. This is Al Beaton saying good evening, good luck, and aloha. Nick?
Ciao, Italy.
Good night, guys.
I was going to go to Nick.
Oh.
Nick, say good night.
Good night, guys.
Yeah, Greg.
Ciao, Italy, everybody. We'll see you in 4 weeks.
All right.